If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Ghoul 1. At the peak of the night, a grand manor perched atop a hill, illuminating the surrounding dark, empty land beyond the estate. The air buzzed with soft music and the lively chatter of countless individuals dressed in exquisite suits, expensive dresses, and shimmering jewelry. A man with slick black hair, sharp blue eyes, and striking features stepped out of an expensive red car, drawing the attention of the paparazzi. Cameras flashed relentlessly as the crowd of photographers jostled and fought for a glimpse of the man of the night. "Mr. Silver, may I have a minute of your time?" A female reporter called out, catching his attention as he handed his keys to one of the valets. "The infamous Ms. Stone. I'm not sure whether I should be honored or frightened to be interviewed by you," Mr. Silver replied, strolling towards her and planting a kiss on the back of her hand. Although slightly flustered, the reporter maintained her professionalism. "No need for such formalities, Mr. Silver. Please tell me how you plan to address the rumors that your company's work is causing widespread illnesses, including cancer and even death in the local area." As the reporter continued her questioning, the valet who had been observing the scene noticed her face had yet to return to normal, still blushing. "Pardon me, what do you think you're doing?" A large man wearing the same red cardigan as the observing valet snorted. However, his cardigan struggled to contain his pot belly. "Apologies, sir. I didn't mean to stare. I'll get back to work," the valet replied, bowing deeply, his grin wide and innocent. "Who are you? You look too young to be one of my men. I believe I would remember someone I deemed unfit at first sight." "Show me your ID," the large man commanded, his tone authoritative. The valet maintained his grin as if his facial muscles were frozen. "Forgive me, sir. I'm new here. Jeremy was supposed to inform you that I start today," the valet explained, handing over his identification, which displayed his name as Derek Summers and his birth year, indicating he was of age. The accompanying photo showcased his overly enthusiastic grin. The large man scrutinized the ID card before returning it. "The code?" the large man inquired, without further explanation. After a brief pause, the valet responded. "Pegasus." The large man stared at him for a moment before turning away. "Get back to work. And stop with that grin. It's creepy," he ordered, walking away and escorting Mr. Silver into the manor. The valet's grin faded, revealing a young boy with bright amber eyes and disheveled black hair that partially covered his forehead. Derek, or rather, Isaac, as he was truly named, opened the door to Mr. Silver's expensive vehicle, settled into the driver's seat, and started the engine. He joined the procession of valets driving down the hill, following the other cars ahead. An intersection loomed ahead, offering two choices, a left turn leading to the small parking lot for the vehicles or a right turn toward the city. The two valets preceding Mr. Silver's car veered left, as they were supposed to. However, Isaac's car lingered for a moment before making a decision. And when the street cleared, the car accelerated, hurtling down the road at breakneck speed towards the city. As the car entered the bustling city, Isaac's excitement grew, and a wide smile spread across his face. "Finally!" he exclaimed with relief and jubilation, pounding the steering wheel as laughter erupted from deep within him. The familiar grin returned, erasing the previous facade. No more back alley naps and makeshift beds. No more scavenging for breakfast in dumpsters. No more groveling before wealthy assholes, kissing their feet. No more! Isaac shouted, his excitement uncontainable. It had always been Isaac's goal to acquire enough money to live a life of peace and prosperity. Ever since he had escaped the wretched confines of his orphanage and spent years on the unforgiving streets, he had come to realize one thing: money was paramount. Money could command respect. Money could bestow a degree of power. Money meant Isaac would no longer have to endure the company of the scum he had been forced to associate with his entire life. With money, Isaac no longer had to endure the stress that came with working under local gangs, faking his identity, or extorting unfaithful rich men and women. It's not that Isaac felt guilty. No. Isaac's moral code had long since withered, if there even was any to begin with. Despite this, he wasn't complaining. It made it easier to be a great scam artist. Instead, if he were to describe it, it'd be exhausting. Completing an intricate and time-consuming scam, only to be instantly thrown into another, was mentally taxing for him, and he couldn't wait for it to be over. With this car, in other words, his biggest score, combined with the money he'd gathered over the last few years, he could now live a life in a luxury apartment, eating whatever he pleased and doing whatever he wanted. For once in his miserable life, his future was looking up. He rolled down the window, allowing a wave of fresh air to wash over him. To say he was excited was an understatement. He was over the moon. He could practically taste the luxury food he'd indulge himself in and the soft mattress he'd come home to every night. However, while singing along to the radio, Isaac found himself falling into a trance-like state, daydreaming about peculiar thoughts. Catching himself before lost control of the wheel, Isaac shook his head as if waking himself from sleep. Again? What's wrong with me these days? Isaac mumbled. In these past few weeks, he'd been having peculiar thoughts and sometimes even dreams when he slept. Burning men, death angels, pirates who couldn't swim and ninjas? It was to the point where he could write a whole book based on the random episodes he'd been having. But he wouldn't let this ruin his mood. After driving for a few minutes, Isaac made a sharp turn into an alleyway where he demonstrated expert-level driving as he cut sharp corners, navigating through the alley that resembled a maze. Soon, he came to a stop and exited the car, grabbing a duffel bag from a nearby dumpster. He opened it, and he removed a screwdriver as he started unscrewing the silver license plate with the words S1LVER. Oh my, you're just a child. Isaac, busy unscrewing the license plate, jumped up, darting his eyes toward where the voice was coming from, only to be met with a well-dressed male with sharp blue eyes and slick black hair. How? Before Isaac could complete his thoughts, the man, who Isaac recognized as Derek Silver, continued speaking. Where have I seen you before? Ah, right. The valet. I must say, for someone so young, you have quite the head on your shoulders. Stealing from a man as great as myself is no easy task. As he spoke, Silver proceeded to walk toward Isaac. Meanwhile, Isaac had countless thoughts running through his head. How did he find him? Why was he acting so casually, as if visiting a friend? However, Isaac put the meaningless thoughts aside and prioritized. If he drops his guard enough, I should be able to land a clean blow and escape. In normal circumstances, Isaac would abandon his loot and escape. However, the thought of all this work being for naught irritated Isaac to no end. He refused to give up. As Silver approached, he prepared to lunge. You see, if it were any other day of the week, I'd have let you escape with the car. It's meaningless to me. Silver stood a few feet away from Isaac, his hand on the trunk of his car as Isaac prepared his attack. However, just before he could move, he became frozen in place as his heart skipped a beat. But I couldn't let such delicate prey go to waste, now could I? Silver's tone rose a few pitches as he opened the trunk of his car, revealing a male in a purple suit with a clean goatee. However, this wasn't what Isaac noticed at first glance. No. Instead, it was blood pouring down the man's face, or maybe the blood was coming from another wound. Isaac couldn't tell. But what was most prominent were the man's black eyes with red pupils. What is that thing? Isaac yelled inwardly. His heartbeat quickened as he unknowingly took a few steps back. It's not every day I come across a ghoul. Looking back to Silver, Isaac's heart sank. Silver grinned widely, drooling as he exuded a suffocating aura of pure killing intent. Additionally, staring into Silver's eyes, Isaac could only stare as he watched the white in the man's eyes disappear, turning pitch black as his pupils became dyed in a blood-red color. Chapter 2, Ghoul 2. Standing in a dark alleyway, behind an expensive car with a dead man in the trunk, Silver and Isaac faced each other, both quiet. This didn't last for long, as Isaac quickly turned around, digging his feet into the ground and making a run for it. His survival instincts had kicked in, and he abandoned his previous plan to escape with his spoils. Screw the car. Lunging deeper within the alleyway, he planned to hide within the shadows to escape. However, after running a few feet, Isaac came to an abrupt stop as he felt something tug his shirt from behind. Dropping to the ground and looking back, Silver stared at him with a cold demeanor. I can't let you leave. I have an identity as Derek Silver to uphold. Before he could finish, Silver watched Isaac plunge a screwdriver through his eye as blood splattered on the ground. Despite this, the cold look on Silver's face never changed, as if pain itself was a joke to him. A cold shiver ran down Isaac's spine as he thought of one word. Monster. Nevertheless, taking this opportunity, Isaac crawled a few feet away, making his way to his feet to bolt toward the nearest corner. Whatever strength or wealth Silver possessed, no one knew the corners and alleys of this city better than Isaac, and he would use that to his advantage. However, just as he made it to his feet, he suddenly dropped to the ground after losing control of his right leg. Confused, Isaac looked back, only to stare in disbelief. Perhaps it was the adrenaline, or maybe his brain that couldn't react fast enough, but only now did Isaac notice his mangled leg as bones stuck out from it. Arg! Isaac let out a blood-curdling scream, echoing through the alleyway. I forgot how fragile humans were. Silver sighed, pressing his finger on his chin. Why me? Just as I thought I could live in peace. He didn't know whether to cry, scream or beg for his life. He could faintly hear the man speaking over him, yet he was incapable of doing anything to defend himself, let alone run. He could only tighten his fists as he asked himself how. He had worked relentlessly for the past few years for one goal. Did the world hate him so much? Was he cursed from the day he was born to never feel a sense of fulfillment and pleasure? Was he fated to live his life suffering through agony and pain? If that was the case, then he didn't know whether life was worth living. Perhaps death would be a mercy. Ah yes. What do you think about becoming one of my kind? I promise it's worth it. Well, for me it is. Silver punched his palm as he grinned widely. In the next second, Silver's smile faded as his face drew closer and closer to Isaac, soon opening his mouth wide open, seemingly about to consume the boy. Two birds with one stone. This must be my lucky day. The silence was broken as a man spoke in a flat tone. He dragged his words as if every syllable carried invisible weight. Both Isaac and the large man looked back, noticing a tall male with black messy hair, drooping eyes, slouched back and glasses. He wore a form-fitting black shirt with rolled-up sleeves, showing his surprisingly muscular forearms. Isaac could barely see it, but the man's chest and arms barely fit in the shirt as well, bulging with strength. The man yawned as he looked toward Isaac. Hello, I'm here for the boy. He waved. Isaac was lost for words. The man didn't look crazy, yet he acted in a peculiar manner. Silver turned to him, tilting his head. Do I know you? He asked, waiting for an answer. Maybe. I'm kinda a big deal. Answered the man. It wasn't long until the ghoul widened his eyes in a childlike manner, pointing his finger. Ah, now I remember you. The infamous Sloth's paradox. I believe we even used to attend Aurelius at the same time as well. News about you would even reach the dark depths of Section Z. Wow, thank you for noticing. It's always nice to be appreciated. The man's words sounded sincere, however, his tone would never lose its heavy lethargy. Allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Hal Lordic, and I'm inherited by the character Jason from the world of Tokyo Ghoul. Silver waited a few seconds for the man to answer. Name, Hal Lordic, alias, Derek Silver. Inherited character, Yamurai Yakumo, Jason. Verse, Tokyo Ghoul. Cool. Perhaps he was being sarcastic, or maybe he was too lazy to express his feelings in any other way but words, but the man kept his answers short. It's common decency to return a greeting. Says Hal, glaring at the man who stays unmoving. Do you mind? I want to get this job done as soon as possible. I'm kinda short on money. The man rubs his fingers together. With a pause, Silver, or Hal, soon replied. Very well. Isaac had barely blinked before he noticed Hal disappear, reappearing before the mysterious man as he drove a visibly heavy punch toward him. Isaac could feel the strong winds kicking up the dust on the ground and pushing back his hair. However, in an even greater feat, Hal's rocket of a blow was stopped as it made contact with the mysterious man's finger. Oh no, I'm being hurt by a super strong ghoul. You dirty monkey, you dare mock me. After a slight pause, for the first time, Hal's face twisted in anger and disgust, gritting his teeth as something appeared from behind him. Red tentacle-like appendages emerged from Hal's back, tearing through his expensive suit, wrapping itself around the large ghoul's arm, shoulder, and upper head, covering his eyes. Interesting. I've never seen a Kagun like that before. Says the man with raised eyebrows. Hal let out a feral howl, drooling as he unleashed a relentless barrage of fiery attacks. He flailed his arms with no control as it destroyed the walls and concrete upon impact. It had even made contact with Isaac's car, destroying it till it was nothing more than scrap metal. But Isaac wasn't focused on that. Instead, he was staring at the speed and agility of the mysterious man as he seamlessly blocked every attack. He was still able to wear a face of uncaring as if this was wasting his time. With the same finger, his hand moved rapidly as the blows stopped before him, never passing his seemingly impenetrable defense. After a minute, Hal had started to breathe heavily. Despite being insane, even he could see the immense gap in power. After Hal paused for a second due to exhaustion, only then did the man make a move. With a swift move of the hand, the mysterious man backhanded Hal as the ghoul instantly smashed into the wall of the alley, creating a crater so large he was able to comfortably lay inside, unconscious. The red tentacles retreated to Hal's back as his face swelled heavily. Isaac had watched in awe, completely forgetting his leg was mangled and destroyed. The mysterious man walked toward Isaac, sitting in a deep squat as he stared at the boy, rummaging through his pockets and pulling out a brown sack. He quickly took out a green bean and handed it to the confused Isaac. "It's a senzu bean. Eat it." Isaac was reluctant and wasn't the trusting type. He stared at the bean for a few seconds, contemplating. This man had supposedly saved him. He didn't know his intentions yet, but if he tried to resist, he might get the same treatment as the ghoul. If the bean was poisonous, well, he didn't really care. He looked around, noticing his destroyed salvation in the form of now scrap metal. The piece he had been chasing his whole life came crumbling down in a matter of minutes. Not to mention his leg. He might never be able to walk again, making his usual crime virtually impossible. To put it simply, Isaac had nothing more to lose. Isaac downed the bean without chewing, instantly swallowing. It hadn't even been a second till Isaac could feel a rush of vitality come from within him, filling him with strength and stamina. However, Isaac instead noticed his injury. In the blink of an eye, his mangled leg had returned to normal, as if he had never been injured in the first place. Instead, he now looked like a bum with his torn pants. "I'm Orion," the man simply said. Snapping out of his trance, the two's eyes met. "I'm Isaac." Isaac replied in a similar manner. "Isaac who?" "Just Isaac." Orion stayed quiet as he stared. "Kid, tell me about the dreams you've been having." Isaac slowly widened his eyes upon hearing this. "How do you know about my dreams?" Isaac didn't need any further explanation to know what the man was talking about. "Because I, including hundreds of others, have experienced what you're going through. You can get rid of the dreams. Well, as long as you don't die." The sinister words perfectly fit the man's cold tone as Isaac unconsciously gulped. Before Isaac could ask anything else, Orion pulled out a device. "A snail?" asked Isaac, staring at the small snail with a black shell, half-closed, lazy eyes and glasses. Isaac couldn't help but dart his eyes between the snail and the man, seeing a striking resemblance. The man decided to ignore Isaac's confused expression and put the snail close to his mouth. "Br br 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 br." A recurring noise escaped from the snail until a subtle click followed. "Jasmine, would you mind opening a senkaimon?" Before the man could finish, a loud yell that made both men flinch came from the snail. "Orion, where the hell have you been? I've been calling you all day." A female voice roared through the snail as Orion distanced the snail from his ear. "Relax, I've been out completing the mission you've been pestering me about for the last week." The female paused. "You found the boy?" she asked as Orion looked toward Isaac. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure." "Pretty sure?" Jasmine's voice trembled with annoyance. "Oh, I also found Hal Lordic." Orion had ignored her question. "Hal Lordic? The Hal Lordic? How? What happened?" "Beats me. I happened to stumble upon him when I was getting the kid." The female paused as she spoke. "And what of Kevin?" "Deceased," he said in his usual flat tone. "I see. I'll open the senkaimon. Bring both the kid and Mr. Lordic. I'll send a team to retrieve Kevin and clean the scene." As she said this, Orion put away the snail and walked toward Hal, easily carrying him over his shoulder. As he did this, two doors mysteriously appeared from thin air, slowly sliding away from each other and revealing a circular void of pure light, making Isaac squint his eyes. "What's wrong, kid? Let's go." "Sorry, I've been told not to go through portals with strangers," blurted out Isaac. He was glad his leg was normal, but he hadn't lost his common sense. This situation was already crazy enough as it was. Ghouls, talking snails, and portals? He was more than happy enough to leave this freak show with no injuries. Orion walked toward him, grabbing the boy from the waist and carrying him with ease. "Is that so?" Orion effortlessly tossed Isaac through the portal as the boy yelled, "Wait!" But it was too late. As this happened, Orion stepped into the white light carrying Hal. Chapter 3, First Scenario 1. Isaac rubbed his head as he got up, slowly searching his surroundings to see he had appeared in a modest room with smooth wooden floorboards and a darker type of the same wood adorned on the walls. He looked up, seeing the wooden darken the closer it reached the high ceiling till it was pitch black. Getting to his feet, Isaac looked around, unimpressed by the emptiness of the room. With only one door, the room was devoid of any life and even furniture. Before Isaac could finish his words, he turned around, looking past the Senkaimon, only to be met with a female. With shoulder-length black hair with a few strands of white and long eyelashes, the female seemed to be in her early 20s as she wore a simple white kimono. Isaac couldn't help but stare at her for a few seconds. Her sharp features and noble-like, yet strict aura seemed mesmerizing. To put it simply, she was beautiful. After a few seconds, Orion stepped out of the white void carrying Hal. As they did, the door to the Senkaimon slid shut, disappearing before Isaac. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. Isaac sighed. Just as Orion dropped Hal onto the ground and a loud thud shook the ground, the single door of the room opened as a figure walked out. You lazy sloth, you could have come here yourself, you didn't need me to open a Senkaimon. A familiar voice entered Isaac's ear. Hey now, is that any way to treat the employee of the week? Look at what a great job I did, replied Orion in a flat tone. Employee of the week my foot. You merely did your job after avoiding it for weeks. As she said this, the female turned her attention to Isaac. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. The female, who seemed not much older than Isaac, extended her hand. Wearing a black robe, the female's black hair was styled up, held together by a long needle. She wore glasses and fashioned a warm smile. Shaking her hand, before Isaac could say anything, a voice came from beside them. Jasmine, meet just Isaac, meet Jasmine. Orion introduced the both of them, only to receive a piercing glare from Isaac. That's not my name. It's just Isaac, as in it's only Isaac. Orion stared blankly without uttering a word. Ignore him. My name is Jasmine. When can we start? Orion asked as Isaac raised an eyebrow. Start? As soon as the two of you leave. You know you can't be here. Saying this, Orion sighed as he bent over and once again hurled Hal over his shoulder without showing any sign of struggle. He walked toward the single door in the room. You too, Catelyn. Jasmine looked at the female sitting in the corner of the room. She'd been quiet all this time, her eyes closed. Isaac couldn't tell if she was asleep or not. Tisk. Clicking her teeth, Catelyn's face contorted in displeasure as she stood and gracefully glided toward the door, standing before Isaac for a second. Wipe the dirt off your face. Pulling a white handkerchief from her sleeve, she handed it to Isaac before leaving the room shortly after. Ah, I see now. That look she'd given him. Although subtle, he knew that look all too well. The look of condescension as one looked down on another as if they were an ant. Isaac had received that look all his life. Although, he didn't know why she'd treated him this way. What had he done to be looked down upon? He'd barely been here for a few minutes. Maybe it's because I'm dressed like a hobo. Isaac sighed, seeing the state he was in. Please, have a seat. Jasmine offered as they both walked toward the nearest chairs. Migraines, insomnia, and unexplainable dreams? Does this sound familiar? Jasmine started. Yes. Isaac answered simply. You needn't hide anything from me. Both me, Orion and even Catelyn have been through this. What is this, a therapy session? Just get to the point. This was what Isaac wanted to say, but he held himself back. Well, my dreams are rarely connected. People suddenly combusting into flames, a moon with a peculiar eye, a dragon, and countless more. It all seems random. Jasmine's eyebrows furrowed as Isaac recounted his dreams. Anything else? Are there any recurring people in your dreams? Think hard. Isaac stayed quiet for a few seconds, as if in thought before finally answering. No, I'm sure. My dreams are usually from a third-person point of view. I'm shown a wide angle of things like fishmen living underwater or sky people with wings they seem to have no use for. Not necessarily people. I see. Jasmine seemed to fall into deep thought as she stared at Isaac, soon standing as she walked toward the door. That's it? Isaac asked, surprised. I guess so. You've given me more than enough to work with. Saying this, she opened the door, letting Orion and Catelyn back in. Already? Orion asked with raised eyebrows while his eyes were still somehow drooped in a lazy manner. Yes, I've come to the conclusion that he's a wanderer. What? Noticing the reactions of both parties, Orion let out a simple, ah, as if he suddenly understood something. Meanwhile, a deep scowl appeared on Catelyn's face. Disgust, annoyance, displeasure. It was almost impossible to narrow her expression down to one word. Can someone tell me what's going on? As all three of them stared at Isaac, Orion walked toward him, gently placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. It'll take a while to explain. Wait, one more time. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this. Isaac lay on a bed as Orion sat beside him, while Catelyn sat in the fat corner with her eyes closed. Isaac and Orion had been speaking for the last hour, yet Isaac was no closer to understanding everything. With a sigh, Orion continued. This is the 5th time. Listen carefully. Isaac nodded. In this world, there's a small chance someone is inherited by what we call a character. Orion started. Like Silver, I mean how? He was inherited by a character named Jason, right? Isaac asked. Exactly. Around this time is where the dreams begin. Now, not too long after someone is inherited by a character, they are plunged into a scenario. Isaac listened carefully. This was what he was having trouble believing. In this scenario, the inheritors enter a coma, where their consciousness is sent to another world. A world where they are given the body of their character and are assigned a quest to complete. Isaac felt a headache coming as he spoke. And you're telling me that the pill you shoved down my throat will induce my scenario? Orion could sense the hint of sass in Isaac's tone. I wouldn't have had to force you if you weren't being so difficult. Oh, you're right, I should just swallow any shady pill a weirdo hands me. Orion rolled his eyes as he continued. As I was saying, there are very rare instances where someone is not inherited by a character, yet still undergoes a scenario. We call these people wanderers. Like you. Isaac stayed quiet as stared at the ceiling. So I'm a reject left to fend for myself. Orion didn't reply. If he had to be honest, he couldn't say Isaac was wrong. It's fine. Nothing new. I don't need a non-existent bum to inherit me. Silence descended in the room as the two stayed quiet. Is that why Catelyn is looking down on me? Because I'm a wanderer. Isaac glanced toward Orion. It's complicated. She's here to recruit you if you seem promising. But since you're a wanderer, we can only truly guess your potential after your first scenario. I'm right here. Catelyn hissed. And don't make me seem like some sort of fangirl. I have no high expectations from a mere wanderer. She added, to which Orion glared at her. What? You know it's harder for a wanderer to complete their first scenario compared to an inheritor. Or do you wish to give the boy false hope, even telling him he can rival the Golden Six of his generation, even the great Lucy Van Hart? That's enough. Orion cut her off. He didn't raise his voice, only uttering 2 words, yet this seemed to be enough for Catelyn to get the message and return to her previous demeanor. What just happened? Golden Six? Isaac asked, to which Orion returned his attention to him. 6 promising individuals who have shown remarkable achievements in their first scenario. They all should be around the same age as you. Isaac's interest plummeted upon hearing this. What did he care about a few famous brats? Orion, taking note of this, decided to drop the subject as well. You should know, if you die it's over. Orion spoke, breaking the silence. Is that why you're here? To record my time of death if I don't make it on the other side. Isaac chuckled, however, the next words he heard left him speechless. No, I'm here to take care of the terror that manifests when someone dies in their scenario. Isaac paused. He wanted to retort, however, he felt a sudden wave of drowsiness wash over him. His eyelids became heavy and his thoughts began to trail off. His vision blurred and as the seconds passed, he lost control of his limbs. It's like he was under anesthesia. It's happening. Isaac could barely hear these words as he stared at the faint image of Orion standing over him. As he dozed off, he heard his last words. Don't die, kid. Just like that, Isaac had shut his eyes, falling unconscious. I'd hate to deal with that terror. They're so bothersome. Orion finished his sentence. You shouldn't have stopped me. Catelyn spoke once again. The boy already has it hard enough as a wanderer. He doesn't need you reminding him of that, or rubbing Lucy Van Hart in his face. Orion replied without looking back. Why? Informing him of the number 1 rank amongst the Golden Six might actually give him some motivation. Orion stayed quiet. You don't think he'll actually survive, do you? Are you forgetting there hasn't been a single wanderer to complete their first scenario in decades? Catelyn wore a face of annoyance as she spoke. I think the boy has grit, and he has a chance. You think so too? After all, you wouldn't be here if you didn't. Catelyn scoffed as Orion continued. Although, one thing is for sure. If the boy does live, it'll shake the world to its core. Initiating Scenario 1. Verse, Hunter x Hunter. Quest, Survive the Dark Continent. Chapter 4, First Scenario 2. Isaac slowly flickered his eyes open and quickly noticed the warm, soft material beneath him, enveloping his entire body in a soothing sensation that made him crave eternal sleep. He felt as if he were lying on a cloud, as all aches and muscle fatigue faded away. Reluctantly, he sat up and surveyed his surroundings. To his surprise, instead of the luxurious mattress he expected, he found himself lying on a bed of intricately woven plants. The plants seemed to extend endlessly, making it difficult for Isaac to discern where they began or ended. His attention was immediately drawn to the mesmerizing flowers that adorned the vegetation. The flowers glowed with a gentle, ethereal light and had 3 small protrusions resembling balls. Instead of petals, the flowers possessed 3 triangular leaves that twisted and curled around the radiant blue balls. Isaac couldn't determine the exact quantity of these unique flowers, as they seemed to blend seamlessly into the vast expanse of the bush. Perhaps there were more hidden within the infinite depths of the foliage. Shaking off his initial enchantment, Isaac refocused his thoughts, recalling the memories of his current predicament. He finally noticed the tall, plain white walls that surrounded him, with narrow pathways snaking through the spaces between them. The bush he lay upon occupied a small clearing that barely accommodated its size. In addition to the strange flora, Isaac sensed an inexplicable heaviness in the air. The atmosphere was dense, making it harder for him to take deep breaths. It felt as though he were submerged in a viscous liquid, each movement met with mild resistance. Where am I? Isaac pondered, his mind still clouded by the confusion of his circumstances. As Orion had mentioned, he had been given a quest to survive. However, the details of what exactly he needed to survive remained frustratingly vague. What am I supposed to be surviving? He muttered to himself, his gaze fixated on the berries-like fruits hanging from the plants. They probably aren't edible. Anything that grows in such a dark and desolate place can't be good for consumption, Isaac reasoned, doubting the nutritional value of the peculiar fruits. Nevertheless, he couldn't spot any other potential sources of sustenance in his immediate surroundings. Reluctantly, he plucked a handful of the plants, stuffing them into his pockets. I'll only eat them if absolutely necessary, he decided, keenly aware of the scarcity of viable food options. Just as Isaac contemplated his meager food supply, something caught his attention from the corner of his eye. He turned his head swiftly, only to come face to face with a figure, a man, or at least something resembling a man. However, this being was unlike any human Isaac had ever encountered. It stood naked, devoid of any discernible genitalia. Instead of a head, a giant dark purple sphere loomed where its head should have been. Isaac was at a loss for words, unsure of how to interpret this perplexing encounter. The creature remained motionless, its unblinking gaze fixated on him from a distance. Being in an unfamiliar environment, coupled with the sudden appearance of an unknown monster, sent Isaac's heart racing. Instinctively, he rose to his feet, preparing to flee, his pockets filled with the glowing plants. But before he could make his escape, Isaac was left dumbfounded, his jaw dropping in disbelief at the sight that unfolded before him. A colossal tree root, adorned with countless yet-to-bloom flowers, rose menacingly from behind the creature. It reached unfathomable heights, nearly scraping against the wall as it twisted and writhed in the air. The creature extended its hand, and simultaneously, the tip of the massive root shot toward Isaac with alarming speed. Reacting swiftly, Isaac leaped off the bush, sprinting toward one of the narrow pathways between the walls. He felt the rush of wind as the root narrowly missed him. It didn't take a genius to realize that being struck by something of that magnitude at such velocity would surely result in a one-way ticket to the afterlife. All I wanted was wealth. How the hell did I end up here? Isaac's internal voice screamed in frustration. Entering one of the paths between the walls, he found himself in a labyrinth of pathways, covered in moss and vines similar to those in the bush. The walls, previously obscured, now revealed their true nature as dilapidated structures. Despite their decay and crumbling appearance, Isaac could discern the remnants of doors and windows, indicating that people had once inhabited this place. Although Isaac didn't particularly appreciate the plain and mundane aesthetics of the white square buildings, it was evident that they were once home to a community. Yet, he couldn't afford to dwell on these observations for long, as an unsettling sound reached his ears from behind after turning another corner. It resembled the chattering of teeth, as if the source was shivering from the cold. Isaac glanced over his shoulder and was met with a chilling sight: a rat-like creature, but unlike any he had ever seen before. The rat had countless eyes, identical to a spider, pairing well with the monster's sharp rows of teeth. Isaac's eyes also caught onto what seemed to be a scorpion tail protruding from the beast's back, its end dripping with a purple liquid. Compared to the thing with the sphere head, this seemed vastly more terrifying. Where Isaac could feel the sphere-headed thing to be eerie, giving him goosebumps and making his hairs stand, this creature outright made him want to scream in terror. Isaac froze, unconsciously taking a few steps back as the beast prepared to pounce. Only, before it could, it suddenly stopped in place, its upper body being yanked back as if its feet were glued to the ground. Isaac noticed the large, yet smaller than before, greenish-blue root wrapping itself around the rat at great speeds, coiling around it like a snake capturing its prey. It wasn't long until the rat dropped to the ground, unable to move, completely wrapped as the unbloomed flowers lay before its long snout. In the blink of an eye, the flower rapidly bloomed, letting out a puff of gas. Despite the darkness, Isaac could tell the gas was deeply yellow in color with green specks. The rat snorted the gas, inhaling it through its mouth and nostrils. In the next second, the beast fell into an uncontrollable spasm. It started to drool, letting out an ear-piercing screech. It wasn't long until Isaac heard loud thumping, quickly noticing the rat's stomach bloating, occasionally expanding vigorously, as if something was trying to break out. Isaac had long come to his senses. Despite being curious about what the yellow pollen was capable of, he wasn't planning to stay. Especially after seeing a second sphere-headed creature appear from opposite the rat with its hand raised. Isaac ran, looking away and trying to find somewhere to hide, ignoring the grotesque sounds of what sounded like flesh being relentlessly ripped apart. Does that thing eat people? He wondered, thinking about what misery the rat was going through. Was the pollen responsible for this? Was the sphere-headed thing indulging in the rotten meat of the rat? Isaac was asking too many questions, hyperventilating with the countless horrors around him. As he ran, he quickly ran out of breath, paired with the already dense atmosphere that tired Isaac out after a few seconds of running. There wasn't enough oxygen in his body. Without thinking, he slightly glanced back, looking at the now far rat. He instantly noticed the pool of blood as limbs stuck out of the rat's stomach, the rat unmoving. But most terrifyingly, the rat's head was gone. What the fuck? The limbs flailed as much as they could, desperate as they largened the hole on the abdomen of the rat. Soon, a large dark purple sphere slowly emerged from the rat, as if the rodent was giving birth. Isaac had seen enough. As adrenaline coursed through his veins, he quickened his speed, turning a corner and stopping as another sphere-headed creature stood before him. He wasted no time in turning another corner and running with all his might. However, after running a minute, he once again came face to face with another one. How many are there? Perhaps it was the one sphere-headed monster he had seen the first time, or maybe this place was littered with them. Either way, Isaac was lucky those things didn't seem to know how to run. They relied on the roots and vines to do their dirty work. He didn't know how they would instantly know of his presence, walking toward him before he himself even saw them. Perhaps it was the vines and plants covering every inch of the ground and most of the walls, crunching and making loud noises as he ran, or maybe that sphere was like a radar. Other than theories, Isaac didn't know what to think. As a con artist, he was accustomed to gathering facts and evidence in order to execute his mission to the best of his ability. He wasn't used to being dumped into an unknown environment where he knew nothing. It was infuriating. He felt powerless. It was only until he turned a corner where he spotted another square white building. However, unlike the others, it seemed to be in good condition. Where the majority of the buildings were covered with moss, vines, and countless other plant life, as well as the deterioration and crumbling that made it seem like they had been abandoned for centuries, this one almost had no moss and only one large hole in one of its walls. Despite Isaac noticing there weren't any doors or windows, he entered quietly, keeping his guard up. Upon entering the room, he found it to be as boring as the outside. It was one big empty open space, devoid of anything but slight dust and a few pebbles. But he didn't mind this. It made it easier for him to watch his surroundings. Especially since it was dark and quiet, he could hide more easily. Of course, he was assuming whether the sphere-headed monsters actually had eyes to see things with. Finding no danger in the large room, he walked to the far end of a dark corner, sitting down and facing the one entrance, watching it intently. He tried to calm his breathing. He was currently sweating heavily and his lungs felt like they were on fire. He gagged a few times but swallowed whatever came up. He didn't need a horrid stench leading whatever horror that was out there to him. He swiftly emptied his pockets, holding the plants with the berries in his hands. The berries hummed slightly, glowing and lighting the dark corner slightly. Placing them down, he noticed something on the wall. Because the light from the berries was illuminating his immediate surroundings, he was able to spot something he couldn't before. Carvings. Chapter 5, First Scenario 3. Isaac grabbed a few of the berries, holding them close to the wall to get a better look. He ignored the fatigue he was feeling in his legs and proceeded to run his fingers through the gaps made in the walls. What is this? He asked himself upon seeing the poor drawings of what seemed to be a few stick men holding swords and spears. Some were even carrying orbs and what Isaac assumed to be regular sticks. There were 5 stickmen on each side, charging toward each other. On another part of the wall, it showed the stickmen dying, on the floor with their tongues sticking out as the numbers of each side increased and the battle proceeded. A war. Isaac continued, walking along the wall as he tried to find the next part of the drawing. Next to the dead men, there was an arrow that was pointing to what Isaac could only explain as monsters. One arrow pointed from a stick man to a giant bug or fly. Another pointed from a man to what looked like a bat with giant ears, and finally, an arrow pointing to a rat with a scorpion tail that seemed familiar to Isaac. It was the same one he had witnessed being brutally murdered. He paused for a second before carrying on, moving further and further along the wall. The next scene showed the battle between the stickmen come to a halt as they encountered the various beasts and monsters. The battle then changed as the humans joined forces to push back the monsters, using their combined manpower. But countless stickmen continued to die while the beasts' numbers only increased. Isaac could once again see the arrows pointing from the fallen men to the new beasts that soon joined the fight. A monster with armor, a giant serpent, something that was completely dark in color. The beasts were never the same. Each was different and increasingly more terrifying, joining the battle until the stickmen were outnumbered. It wasn't long until the stickmen turned and retreated. After searching for a second, Isaac found the next scene and stepped back slightly. This scene specifically was significantly larger than the others. It showed countless stickmen leaving a large island on a boat. An island where the previous monsters and beasts could be seen inhabiting. However, Isaac squinted and noticed a few stickmen with their hands in the air, still on the island. Isaac walked across the wall, looking for the next scene, only to find nothing. Instead, he found a small paragraph of scripture in a language he had never seen before. Beside it was what he assumed to be a drawing of a compass showing where north and south were pointing. I barely know English. What the hell is this crap? Isaac stared at the scripture. Unbeknownst to his surroundings, he stepped on something that broke the eerie silence, clattering as Isaac leapt back, yelping slightly. He waved his berries at where he was standing previously, only to notice a stack of bones leaning on the wall, clothed with the jaw wide open and something hanging from the neck. It took a few seconds for Isaac to come to his senses. Throughout the day, he had seen a scorpion rat, living plant life and a sphere-headed person who was born from the stomach of its victims. A skeleton was not going to be enough to keep him petrified for long. He chucked a few pebbles at the skeleton, making sure it wasn't dangerous while laughing at how his life had come to him, checking whether or not skeletons were alive, and thoroughly checked the rest of the room for anything he might have missed in the dark. He soon sat beside the skeleton, darting his eyes between the carvings and the skull. It's history, he concluded. From what I can understand, there was a war that resulted in countless deaths. Then the monsters were born from dead people. The humans were unable to fight back and had to flee. But not everyone escaped. He wasn't sure about the first part of his story. How could monsters be born from humans? It made no sense. However, upon remembering how the sphere-headed creature was born from its victims, it didn't seem impossible. Thinking for a few seconds, Isaac sighed. I guess I should stop using common world knowledge. Nothing that's happening makes sense. Despite pondering the monster's birth, he had no trouble believing the latter part of his theory. After all, he had the deceased corpse to prove it. If he was correct, and this man was left here after humanity fled, were there other humans? Perhaps they were living in the other buildings. Isaac thought for a couple of seconds. He couldn't decide whether other humans being here he wasn't aware of was more terrifying than the sphere-headed monsters. But he now had countless other questions. Why were they fighting? How is it possible those monsters exist? And where are the humans now? He thought for a few seconds before shaking his head and getting to his feet. Whatever. This won't increase my chances of surviving. He walked to the corpse, feeling the rough and durable material of the jacket. Isaac had never felt anything like it. It was flexible yet sturdy, protective yet light as a feather. Isaac glanced at the clothes he was wearing. He still had the red vest and torn suit pants from his scam. He didn't have a chance to change. He tried his best to remove the jacket from the skeleton, without causing any damage to the deceased. As he did, an item clattered against the rib cage of the skeleton. He reached out his hand and stared at what he assumed to be a compass on a piece of string hanging from the skeleton's neck. He looked back to the engraving of the compass he had ignored before, placing the real compass over the drawing. Is it broken? He thought, noticing the compass wasn't facing in the right direction the drawing indicated. Where it should have been facing straight ahead, north, it was facing toward the east, to his right. Maybe this guy drew it wrong. He turned, looking toward where the compass was facing, and before he could finish his thought, his heart skipped a beat as he faced the only entrance in the room, noticing the sphere-headed creature standing silently with its arms by its side, unmoving. Isaac had also noticed the large, yet vastly smaller than the previous, root slithering toward him. In that moment, Isaac froze, not knowing what to do or how to act. He was defenseless and his only exit was being blocked. Without thinking, he held his breath, not moving an inch as he sweated profusely. A few seconds passed as the root slowed down, soon coming to a stop as it turned its tip left and right as if it were lost. Isaac, still holding his breath, stayed quiet. It wasn't long until the root slowly backed away, retracing over the hole in the wall and disappearing into the vines and plant life. Soon, the sphere-headed creature turned its head, walking away with silent steps, leaving Isaac still frozen in the same position. After a minute, Isaac took a gasp of fresh air, dropping to the ground and grasping his chest, trying to get rid of the feeling of his lungs being twisted. He breathed heavily, hyperventilating as he leaned on the wall, staring at the exit and keeping his guard up. Isaac was confused. Some people might think they had just gotten lucky, but not Isaac. He didn't believe in luck. Why? There was a reason the monster had left him. In the time he wasn't paying attention to when the creature left, something had happened for him to be able to survive. He thought back, remembering his beating heart, his frozen state and his suspended breath. Nothing made sense. While thinking, he looked to the compass, noticing it was no longer facing the exit, but instead moving steadily in the same direction the sphere-headed creature had walked in. In the next second, the needle shot away from what it was following, pointing east and refusing to move. Does it point to the monsters? He thought, looking east then to the skeleton. No wonder he died. This place is hell. Isaac thought, thinking for a few seconds before concluding. If I'm right, there are two possibilities. This compass is pointing to another sphere-headed creature that's closer to me, or... He gulped. There's something far worse waiting for me due east. Isaac stood up, looking toward the carvings yet still keeping his guard up, taking a few glances toward the exit. You were left here and couldn't survive. You don't look like a victim of that thing, so maybe it was starvation. Isaac looked around, seeing nothing in the area but pebbles and debris. Hell, maybe it was suicide. I wouldn't want to live here either. Isaac ran his fingers through his messy hair, sighing and sitting back down. The memories of how he got here ran through his head. From the man-eating ghoul to the revelation of other worlds. And to think he was hours away from having everything he's ever wanted. Unbeknownst to him at the time, it was the opposite. He was hours away from losing everything he had worked so hard for. And maybe even his life. Trapped in this purgatory with no money, food, or even the possibility of freedom and peace seeming so foolish made his head hurt and his blood boil. He stared at the skeleton with no emotion. It was like a mirror. An inevitable fate of what was to come. God damn it! Isaac yelled inwardly. It wasn't enough he had become a lamb for slaughter, he also had to suffer the mockery of his malefactor. Isaac gritted his teeth as he walked to the skeleton, snatched the jacket off of him, tossed his vest as he tried on his new attire. F***ck off. Give it your best shot. Isaac dropped to the ground, crossing his legs and watching the exit intently with his new compass lying before him. I'll survive. Just watch me. Chapter 6, Fito 1. A boy could be seen in between two tall white buildings, leaping a few times from one patch of solid ground to another amongst the limitless plant life engulfing every inch of his surroundings. Wearing baggy cargo pants and a large jacket, both with peculiar patterns on them, he carried a sharpened bone and kept his body extremely compact, avoiding contact with anything around him. The heavy fog in the air and darkness made it hard to see 10 meters ahead, yet the boy continued, only looking at the ground and peeking at his surroundings every so often. It wasn't long until he came to a stop, breathing heavily as he struggled to take in a long satisfying deep breath, looking toward the compass hanging from his neck and noticing the needle pointing to his right. Glancing around a corner to his right, he crouched down and held his breath despite his lungs feeling as though they were on fire. Around the corner was a humanoid sphere-headed being walking away from him. It walked slowly, swaying from side to side as if it barely knew how to walk on 2 feet. The boy looked around, picking up a small pebble and throwing it around the corner, over the creature as it landed on some plant life. The creature darted its head erratically toward the place of impact but kept walking after a few seconds. I knew it. The cranium and plant life are connected. No wonder it kept finding me. It had been a few days since Isaac had arrived in this world. Well, he thought it was a few days. The truth was, Isaac had nothing to indicate how much time had passed. He wasn't even able to see the sun. Wherever this place was, it was in a never-ending state of eerie darkness that never failed to make Isaac nervous. At this time, Isaac had done everything he could to find even a crumb of information that may allow him to survive in this hell. He had made, what he now called, the cranium his top priority. Being the biggest threat to his life, he made it a mission to understand everything about this being. It was only because he had recently discovered the connection between the plant life and the craniums that he was successfully able to elude them. Despite looking like humans, most of their senses were dulled and they relied on using the plants as their eyes and ears. Great! It's not like this whole place isn't coated in vines and moss. Isaac sighed, staring at his compass till the needle darted away from the right, pointing towards south, the opposite way he was going. He still hadn't figured out what the needle was pointing to and he didn't want to know. He made sure he always traveled in the opposite direction. He was barely surviving the cranium even while knowing its weakness. He wasn't going to dabble in anything that Isaac could only assume to be a vastly more dangerous monster. Releasing his breath, he breathed heavily and rummaged through his pockets, pulling out a berry glowing blue and quickly popping it into his mouth. He quickly chewed and swallowed and it wasn't long until he felt a warm feeling rush through his body. His breath softened as the fatigue in his muscles instantly disappeared, as well as any hunger or exhaustion he was feeling. As this soothing feeling coursed through, Isaac felt a hint of nostalgia upon remembering the senzu beans that had the same effect. He stood up, staring at the next patch of solid ground, almost 2 meters away from him. He tucked his knees, leaping like a gazelle and barely making it. Isaac recognized the craniums as his greatest enemy, however, this still didn't distract him from the fact that escaping was vastly more important. From what he could understand, he was in an abandoned city. And from his surroundings, it looked as though the last time humans were able to walk freely here was ancient history. Ancient history he knew very little about. The only piece of history to indicate what had happened was the carvings in his hideout, and he was still no closer to fully understanding the story that was trying to be told. Not to mention the small paragraph of a language he had never seen before. Isaac didn't think much of his terrain at first, other than it being all green. But after exploring, he quickly noticed the confusing layout of the city. It was like navigating through a maze or a labyrinth. Dead ends, never-ending paths, and even some routes he couldn't pass due to the sheer amount of plant life. Even the damn city is my enemy. I'll never escape at this rate. Preparing for another leap, Isaac paused. He had put most of his trust into the compass when detecting threats, therefore he unknowingly lowered his guard when seeing the needle still points south. Because of this, he failed to notice a figure standing in the path to his left before it was too late. Without looking at what this was, Isaac jumped back, tumbling over some plant life before making it to solid ground where he crouched and calmed himself. Before running and leaving, since he had now alerted the cranium, he peeked around the corner to catch a glimpse of whatever was able to elude his senses and the compass while holding his breath. But upon seeing what was before him, he couldn't help but freeze slightly and lower his guard. A girl. Around the corner stood a female facing away from him, wearing a green suit jacket with blue trimmings. It adorned a circular pattern, a spiral of sorts that all connected with each other, branching off to smaller circles. They were the same patterns on Isaac's clothing he had found off the corpse. The female wore pants similar to the jacket, however, despite the peculiar attire, it was the first thing Isaac noticed. Instead, it was the female's shoulder-length silky green hair that added a hint of color to the bleak and bland surroundings. Isaac had never seen anyone with green hair. It was the type of thing you would see in cartoons and comic books. His thoughts were soon cut off as a gentle voice reached his ears. "You can come out. You don't have to hide." The female slowly turned around, meeting Isaac's gaze as he hid back around the wall. For a second, he had caught a glimpse of her face. Her fair smooth skin and bright green eyes stood out the most, making her appear healthy and full of vitality. However, this wasn't what Isaac had his mind on. "Why am I surprised she saw me? I'd be more afraid if she didn't notice the ruckus I made," thought Isaac, releasing his breath. "Please, you need not be afraid," the female continued. However, Isaac was already turning around. "Hell no. Standing in the middle of this nightmare casually without a care? This girl is not normal." Without any further thought, Isaac bolted away, running at full speed without worrying about the surrounding plant life. He had learned long ago not to trust people so casually, especially if they were as shady as the female he had just left. Isaac kept running, quickly running out of breath as he turned a corner every so often. Luckily, he hadn't come across any cranium and soon arrived at a white building with a hole in the wall. Climbing in, he made sure to avoid a piece of cloth in the open, stretched between the hole in the wall, one end attached to a skeleton beside the wall and the other end buried under a pile of rubble. Although it was nothing fancy, Isaac found this to be an adequate alarm system for now. Seeing as how the cranium couldn't see, he had no need to conceal the self-made tripwire. Landing on the ground, Isaac walked toward the back of the room, removing his baggy jacket and sitting on the ground, staring at what looked to be a map scraped onto the ground showing countless paths branching off of each other like a maze, and off to the right was a small circle labeled home. However, if one looked closely, they could notice the faint white chalk that seemed to be erased. It's like the paths keep changing. Placing his compass down beside the map, he began to draw new paths where the old ones ended on the west side of the map. On the opposite side, the east, the maze seemed to be vastly more scarce when compared to the south, north and west. The long way, but also the safest. I have enough berries to last me a while. Now that I know the cranium's weakness, I can search till I finally escape. As Isaac focused on the map, a fleeting thought constantly hung on his mind. Why didn't the compass pick up on the girl? Does it not work on humans? Since finding the compass, Isaac hadn't once asked himself how it worked. He didn't care. As long as it continued to save his life, he couldn't care less whether it was alien magic or witchcraft and voodoo. This is a problem for another day. I need to focus on. Before Isaac could finish his thought, a chill ran down his spine as a familiar voice broke the silence. "You'll never leave the city by simply roaming aimlessly." The voice was soft and warm. The thought of simply letting the soothing voice echo in his mind came as a slight temptation to Isaac. Despite the alluring feeling the voice presented, Isaac stayed focused, hopping to his feet, gripping his bone sword and facing the intruder. It was the same female as earlier, standing before him with a slight smile. Isaac lowered his guard slightly. Not because he felt comfort after seeing her bright smile, but because he was confused. She seemed too innocent. Isaac had seen every type of scumbag one can come across. The fake friend, the benefactor trying to manipulate you, and even the true friend who took advantage of you just because they could. He could tell the good from the bad and the bad from the badder. But this female seemed as if she was too perfect. Like she had no flaw. Like it was easy for Isaac to put all his trust in her and not think twice. But that didn't assure him at all. Someone so harmless in a place like this only made him fear her more. He glanced slightly to his alarm system, seeing it was still standing, as if she passed right through it. "Don't be so surprised. I'm not blind, after all." She chuckled, prompting Isaac to raise an eyebrow. "Who are you? What do you want?" asks Isaac, trying his best to get some answers before they proceed any further. The girl stood without moving a muscle, continuing to speak with a smile. "My name is Fito, and I can help you escape." Chapter 7, Fito 2. Escape? Given the circumstances, I find that hard to believe. Weirdo. Isaac added inwardly, however, he couldn't deny his interest was piqued upon her outlandish claims. "You shouldn't be so quick to judge people. After all, I am the only chance you have at escaping the city," she protested, the same smile never leaving her face. "Fine, humor me. How are you going to escape? The female started walking toward Isaac as he stepped back. She passed him, looking toward his hand-drawn map as she continued to speak. It's clear that you've already figured out this city isn't normal. She started as Isaac raised an eyebrow. I mean the terrain. This city is named Ionath, the Labyrinth city, built by the most talented architects and the most revered war strategists. Built by a nation which prided itself on its powerful army, the city was made to be the perfect base in case of any ambush from neighboring nations. Despite this, said nations felt they had nothing to fear. Upon arriving they would enter the city, soon finding themselves lost in the maze. They would ultimately die from starvation or by the swords of the home nation. Saying this, she bent over and began to draw new paths onto Isaac's map. It wasn't soon after that Ionath became known as the nation with the strongest military power and the most thriving. Sounds more like a prison rather than a safe haven, Isaac commented. Quite the contrary. Despite the slight adjustment period, this city was once one of peace and prosperity. Low crime, happy residents and... She paused. It was once so beautiful. She mumbled, standing and looking around. For once, Isaac caught the innocent smile faltering for a second. Is that what happened to this place? Other nations ambushing the city? Is that the war that made everyone abandon their home? Isaac asked, pointing toward the carvings on the wall. No. That was something that ensued generations after the time I speak of. Something far more terrifying. She said, whispering the last sentence, yet still speaking loud enough for Isaac to hear. How do you know all this? You appear mysteriously in the middle of this place and expect me to believe you. Isaac found the story intriguing, but at the end of the day, it was just that, a story. He wasn't going to risk an escape plan that could very well be a suicide mission. Is this proof enough? She asked, pointing to Isaac's map as she took a step back. Isaac slowly walked over to the female who dusted her hands. Looking down, he witnessed his map had become vastly larger. New paths he'd never come across, or some he had even avoided, were all right here before him. Even the east side he purposefully avoided was filled in. Long ago, I too used to live in this city. If she's telling the truth, then she'll be incredibly useful. However, this still isn't enough for me to escape. Some paths are shrouded in plant life, and I have no interest in traversing toward the east. Meaning there are only one or two paths that'll safely get me out of here. Before he could finish his thought, Fito cut him off. I'd advise you not to get your hopes up. This map isn't the accurate layout of Ionath. As she said this, Isaac looked at her as if she were crazy. Are you telling me you just ruined my map for no reason? Asked Isaac, ready to plunge his bone sword through her throat as he revealed an unnerving smile. No, yours was also inaccurate. The layout of the city can't be drawn on one map. The structure of Ionath changes every night. Saying this, Isaac couldn't help but stare blankly with a dumbfounded expression. He noticed the city seeming more unfamiliar as the days went by, but he just thought he was imagining things. After all, what were the chances this city was alive? Isaac looked toward the map once again, pointing out something he'd noticed she'd added. What is this? He pressed his finger against a tall cylinder building in the middle of the map with a large sphere atop it. Despite the city changing once a day, during the night to be more specific, there's one place in the center of Ionath which never changes position. The tower. Isaac chose not to mention the fact this place has no night and day, and instead asked something else. Where is this tower? And what's so special about it? The tower is taller than any building in the city. It'll help us see Ionath from a bird's eye view, seeing which path leads to the city's exit. Are you forgetting the heavy fog and darkness in the atmosphere? I can barely see a few meters in front of me. We won't be able to see the whole city. Fito shook her head. What you call fog is merely the pollen exuding from the plant life. The further we move from it, the clearer the air will be. We won't be able to see the paths, but we will see the buildings. With it, we can determine the directions of the paths between them. Hearing this, Isaac couldn't help but freeze for a moment. It sounded too good to be true. However, the next words he heard quickly proved his point. And the tower is located exactly east of here. East. Isaac paused. Not only would he be risking his life, but he would also be walking straight toward whatever monster was in that direction. After a few seconds, Isaac spoke. Why should I trust you and follow your plan? For all I know, I could be walking into a death trap. Isaac asked, but unfortunately, he already knew the answer. Given the current circumstances, I don't think you have a choice. She replied, her smile unwavering. Yet, her words now carried a subtle nuance, as if she were mocking him. She was right. Isaac could reject the offer, however, if what she said was true, he was as good as dead if he didn't accept. How did you survive whatever happened here? And why were you standing in the middle of the path when I saw you? He was going to risk his life with this chance, therefore he thought it was only right to try and leech as much information from her as possible. I'll tell you once we reach the tower. Deal. What's she planning? Isaac was a good judge of character, however, for once, he was completely stumped as to what was going on inside of Fito's head. Fine. Isaac peeked around a corner, confirming the compass validity. Ever since it couldn't sense Fito, Isaac had an urge to make sure the only thing that was keeping him alive wasn't broken. Behind him, Fito stood with her bright smile, waiting for Isaac to proceed as she followed. Isaac hopped a small distance, looking at his compass as he traveled directly toward where the needle was pointing, straight ahead. With every step, he became more nervous. He tried to take a deep breath but the heavy and suffocating atmosphere always made it hard. Rummaging through his pockets, he took out a blueberry and quickly stuffed it into his mouth. How much further till the tower? Isaac looked back, his sentence cut short after witnessing Fito's expression change for the second time. That's not how you should be using those. With a straight face, she spoke pointing toward the berries in Isaac's pockets. Despite her face being neutral with no emotion, to Isaac who had only seen her smiling till now, she might as well have been frowning with a detested expression. What? You shouldn't be eating them, I mean. It's a miracle you haven't been poisoned to death. Isaac raised an eyebrow. The berries were one of the only reasons he was able to survive this long. Allow me to show you what I mean. Snatching Isaac's bone sword from him, she leapt out of the corner they were hiding in and bolted toward the many vines slithering nearby a cranium that had suddenly appeared. Hey, what are you doing? Despite trying his best to whisper, Isaac's shock could only result in an outburst of vocals as he could only watch Fito sprint closer and closer to the cranium. The cranium, long noticing the smiling female running toward it, waved its arm as a vine with countless unbloomed flowers of varying sizes shot out toward her. Digging her feet into the ground, Fito leapt over the vine, slashing the stem of the flowers rapidly as they dropped to the ground. Soaring through the air, Isaac could only be mesmerized by her smooth movements and elegant swordsmanship, akin to a dancing ballerina rather than a sword-wielding brute. Meanwhile, Fito's tricks did little to slow down the vines. Countless more appeared, surrounding both Isaac and Fito, snapping the boy out of his trance. This crazy bee! No way, will I have a cranium claw its way out of me! Yelled Isaac internally, finding a solid patch of ground between plant life and holding his breath. As he did, he was barely able to notice Fito grab one of the severed unbloomed flowers and force a berry into it, without it exploding in her face. When did she? Isaac checked his pockets, noticing the berry was one of his. Fito held the flower, shaking it a few times as Isaac could visibly see it expanding, similar to a balloon with air being pumped into it. At the same moment, countless vines came rocketing toward Fito, ready to riddle her with holes. However, before her inevitable end, Fito launched the flower toward the cranium who had been hiding behind the vines. Upon impact with the sphere on the cranium, the unbloomed flower burst, releasing a black gas, completely shrouding the cranium. Soon after, the vines halted midair, right before Fito. As the vines slumped to the ground, Isaac unknowingly released his breath as his jaw dropped at the sight before him. The black air dissipated, revealing the cranium stumbling as its skin rapidly turned grey. Falling to the ground and onto its knees, its skin, bones and flesh started to turn to ash. But most notably, its sphere head also started to deteriorate, crumbling until the being was reduced to dust. You just killed a cranium. It seems so. Fito replied with a light chuckle. Chapter 8, The Tower 1. It seems so. But how? How did its body just crumble? Isaac was dumbfounded. Since a few moments ago, he'd never tried to engage the cranium. He must have built an unconscious thought that it was perhaps immortal. I told you. The Arose is a miracle herb that can cure any disease. However, when paired with the right ingredients, it can also be weaponized and used to harm. What you just saw there was a combination that gained the ability to corrode any substance it comes into contact with. Isaac looked toward the ground and part of the walls the gas had touched, seeing it had disappeared, as if it weren't even there. A captivating yet disquiet power, wouldn't you agree? Imagine if it fell into the wrong hands. Saying the last sentence, Isaac quickly noticed Fito staring at him, yet decided to ignore it. Instead, he stared at the blue glow that had suddenly appeared, slowly turning brighter by the second. It was one of the few sources of light he'd seen since coming to this world. The dark atmosphere made it hard not to notice even the slightest flicker of light. The blue glow lit up the area and soon, plant life started to rapidly emerge from where the Brian had fallen. The plant life quickly started to grow and engulf the surroundings, overlapping the previous plants and coating all the small safe zones Isaac had taken note of. As Isaac and Fito moved back, the vines passed their feet and moved up the walls, clinging and spreading to any surface it could, like an infection symbiote. Isaac noticed the path started to look more and more like the path with overgrown plant life he purposefully stayed away from. "We need to leave, the craniums are going to be here soon." Before Isaac could finish his sentence, something caught his eyes. Countless prisms like plants with 3 leaves protruding outward started to appear around where the Brian had died. However, that wasn't what caught Isaac's eyes. Instead, it was the 3 small vines escaping out from between the 3 leaves, its end carrying a blue glowing berry Isaac knew all too well. "The berry is made from the cranium," Isaac blurted out. "Yes, the sphere head, to be more specific. It contains secrets that even I don't understand." "How ironic. Something so beautiful born from a monster." Isaac turned around, noticing Fito staring at him with judging eyes. "Monster? That seems a bit far. They are only protecting what's important to them." Isaac stared back. "I didn't realize you were such an expert. Why don't you share with the class how you know so much about these creatures?" Fito blinked, as if she had suddenly just woken up from a deep sleep. "My apologies. I didn't mean to glare. And don't worry, this'll all make sense when we leave this city." Saying this, Isaac had no time to retort as vines had suddenly wrapped around his legs. Unbeknownst to them, the vines had slithered through the plant life while the Brians stood at both exits, blocking their escape. With a powerful tug, Isaac was slammed to the ground, trying his best to rip the vines off his legs but to no avail. Quickly, the vines wrapped around his legs, crawling upwards with immense grip strength. Isaac, witnessing the unbloomed flower draw closer and closer to his face, grabbed one of the flowers Fito had sliced previously. Moving quickly, he stuffed an Arose inside, using all his power to toss the bloating flower toward the Brian as the vines had completely trapped him. Rolling onto the ground and barely arriving at its feet, it wasn't long until a release of gas was heard, as if a balloon had popped. The Brian was concealed in black gas and the vines soon fell lifeless as Isaac broke free, seconds away from the Brian gaining a new friend. "Never did I, a man, think I'd be this frightening to give birth." Looking toward Fito and seeing her dancing gracefully with her bone sword, he took it upon himself to collect the loot. "Thank you, horrible monsters. I salute your sacrifice. I promise, your death will assure my health." Isaac practically rubbed his hands and giggled like a goblin as he filled his large jacket with glowing berries. "Let's go, before we're surrounded," Isaac yelled, picking all he could and yelling out to Fito. She quickly leapt toward him, and soon, they were sprinting at full speed toward their destination. However, it wasn't long till Isaac stopped to take a break. With this atmosphere, walking too fast would put him out of breath, let alone running at full speed. "Are you going to tell me how you were doing that back there?" Fito, breathing normally as if she hadn't moved at all, looked toward Isaac, her smile returning. "Do what?" Isaac asked in between breaths. "When you held your breath." Isaac stared blankly. "Zetsu, I mean," she clarified, to which Isaac let out an ah of understanding. "I'll answer if you tell me how you can fight like that. And how you don't even seem as if you're out of breath." Fito stayed silent for a few seconds. "I was born in this city. Since this nation prided itself on its military power, kids were taught to swing a sword before they could read. As for the latter, I have really good stamina," she answered, looking at Isaac as if she were expecting something. "How were you able to survive all this time? How old are you? How were you?" Before Isaac could finish, he was cut off. "We had a deal. Answer my question." Her smile may have seemed innocent at first, but when she commanded Isaac with the same smile, it only made her seem ominous. "I have no idea what Zetsu is." Fito stared at him blankly as he remained ignorant. "I see. Very well. My breathing." Now that Isaac thought about it, since his first encounter with the Brian in his home, and remembering the fact that he could constantly elude the Brian despite having butter feet, the only thing that all these scenarios had in common was his held breath. He never thought much about it. The held breath was just his way of being fully immersed in the zone. I hope you're done resting. We're here. Isaac looked up, seeing nothing but the misty skies and tall buildings. How can you tell? Without saying anything, Fito pointed to a small opening between the tall buildings. At first, Isaac saw nothing. However, after a few uncomfortable expressions and heavy squinting, the silhouette of a tall structure came into view. It's not too far away. We can make it within an hour if we hurry. Saying this, Fito started to hop between the plant life, leading the way as Isaac was barely able to pick himself up. After passing countless paths and outrunning a few Brians, Isaac, sweating profusely and heaving like an out-of-breath mule, stood before a colossal building with Fito beside him. His eyes first noticed the sleek and intricate patterns on the outside of the building, recognizing them as the same patterns on his and Fito's clothing. Despite the city being abandoned for some time, the building showed no sign of deterioration or ruin. Walking toward the large tower, Fito placed both hands on the two large metal doors, pushing them open as dust rose into the air. Isaac followed Fito in, witnessing a large open space. Despite the outside looking clean and untouched, the same couldn't be said for the interior. Countless debris of miscellaneous items could be seen scattered in the large room. Recognizing some of them as chairs and small tables, Isaac was quickly able to spot the only door in the room. The only thing that looked to be untouched was a long black and purple table that looked as if it were drilled to the ground. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all made from the same grey material as the buildings outside, only difference being the spiral on each surface varying from size, therefore, it wasn't hard to spot the double yellow door behind the purple stand. Following Fito, they opened the door, walking through and entering a long corridor with countless doors along the walls, leading to smaller rooms. Once again, the ground was filled with rubble and wreckage while some of the doors also seemed to have been ripped off its hinges. However, while the previous room was filled with chairs and tables, this was filled with torn mattresses, corroded and blunt knives and countless intact glass vials of varying sizes. This way. Fito pointed straight ahead, grabbing Isaac's attention. Walking through the corridor, Isaac took small looks inside the room, noticing nothing important but the same garbage as the corridor and cat-sized black boxes in each room. Soon, they came to the end of the corridor where Isaac raised his eyebrow at the sight before him. Half a cylinder made of a material Isaac thought to be plastic, jutted out from inside the wall, extending vertically from the ground to the ceiling. As they approached it, a small portion of the cylinder slid open horizontally, letting out a slight mechanical sound that broke the eerie silence, showing the interior to be a small circular space. Fito walked in without a thought while Isaac took a second, slowly following her shortly after. Despite not being able to see the inside from outside the cylinder, Isaac and Fito could clearly see the corridor they had just left. What now? Before Isaac could finish, the cylinder moved, shocking Isaac as he braced himself. Darting his eyes to Fito, he witnessed her take her hands off a small lever that he somehow had missed. Looking outside, he could see they were moving further and further from the ground till they passed the ceiling. After a second of darkness, another corridor with scattered junk came into view as they continued to move upward. This thing is an elevator. He blurted out, relaxing and feeling slightly embarrassed after the realization. An elevator? Asked Fito with both eyebrows raised. Ah, yes. That's what we call it in my nation. Replied Isaac. He didn't feel the need to hide he was from another world, however, he'd rather avoid that long and tedious, possibly even awkward conversation. Interesting. I take it you've never been on an elevator. I assume that was why you didn't recognize it, or why you were too afraid. Says Fito, overpronouncing the word. Yes, I have. More times than I can count. This elevator is just a little different to ours. I wasn't able to realize what it was until it started to move. He replied with a chuckle. More times than you can count? Amazing, you must have been a high member of society to be able to have such luxurious opportunities. This is the only elevator in this city and it's only preserved for the elderly, patients or those of high status. Me? High status? It's the complete opposite. Isaac thought as he gave an awkward chuckle, soon pausing as he processed her words. Patience. Looking outside the elevator, they had long started to speed up, but Isaac was still able to catch clear glimpses of the floors they were passing thanks to the faint light the elevator was giving off. The more floors they passed, the more the corridors became cleaner and less destroyed until the only signs of abandonment Isaac could see were misplaced items. The mattresses were now intact, even laying on a metal bed with sheets over it. The knives were still corroded, however still retained most of its originality. It had a long handle, only the tip being sharp, as if the knife was only used for precise punctures. Additionally, similar equipment could now be seen. Needles, small items with a handle and flat top, and white bandages. This place is a hospital. Chapter 9, The Tower 2. Yes, it is. I'm surprised it took you this long even after seeing the circumvator. Fito replied with a smile. I have no idea what that is. Isaac thought as he sighed. I'm assuming we'll have to travel to the top of the tower to get the best view possible of the city. Isaac asked, inspecting the inside of the elevator as he ran his fingers through it. Yes, in fact. As Fito spoke, the view they had been observing of the floors passing had suddenly turned dark. Are we at the top? Almost. The faint light of the elevator was all they had to illuminate the surroundings, and it worsened as they passed all the floors. Despite this, Isaac didn't mind. He'd been living in darkness all this time, he'd practically adapted to it. However, he wouldn't have to endure this for long as the elevator slowed down, soon coming to a stop. As the doors slid open, a large room appeared before them. Walking out, Isaac watched his step, looking around the once again messy area. The room seemed to be some sort of dome, evident by the floor which would curve upward into the wall, then again curving into the ceiling. The room was littered with a few sheets of paper, while some still stayed organized on the wall, showing the anatomy of the human body, and syringes, while Isaac could spot a familiar black box on an intact purple table. Additionally, Isaac found himself staring at the countless potted plants in the area. Plants he'd never seen before. And despite the tower being abandoned, they still looked fresh and healthy. They varied from sizes, some being taller than Isaac, while some he could fit in the palm of his hand. He looked toward one of the plants that reached to his chin in height, resembling what he knew to be a mushroom, only this fashioned sharp green spikes on its head and an unsettling blood-red color. Meanwhile, he could only describe another plant to be similar to a certain carnivore that typically assaulted a short Italian plumber. Looking away, Isaac's eyes practically sparkled as he ran toward the walls. Instead of stone, the surroundings walls were made from see-through glass, allowing one to look down at the entire city. Pressing his hands against the glass, Isaac looked out, seeing the countless white buildings and mist-shrouded paths between them. Despite not being able to see the paths, Isaac could determine where they lead using the buildings. Looking to the horizon, Isaac could barely see where the buildings and mist stopped, seemingly disappearing. I found it. It's not too far, if we leave now we can make. Darting his head back, rambling in excitement, Isaac witnessed Fito standing over the purple table, faced away from him. There was once a doctor who worked in this very hospital. From a young age, the doctor was trained to be an elite warrior, like every other child of her age. Despite being gifted and showered with praises from their superiors, the doctor was unhappy. Fito began to speak while standing before the purple table. Isaac was confused, however, didn't interrupt. They, unlike their peers and most of the people around them, knew the beauty and value of human life, yet they were forced to take it. They hated this. It went against everything they felt to be right. Therefore, they decided to leave that part of their life and become a doctor, not without any trouble. The doctor was lucky they'd gained strong ties with important people who were able to help her change her life. At first, the city despised the doctor. A skilled warrior abandoning their duty was a disgrace to say the least. However, the doctor was soon able to prove her worth by helping countless individuals. In a short time, they became known as the greatest doctor in Ionath, maybe even the world. They became so successful they built this tower as a hospital in the middle of the city, so anyone in need could always find where they could get help. Fito stared at Isaac. Is that the end? The doctor lives happily ever after. For a long time, the doctor knew peace, doing what they loved. And they were good at it. However, living in a nation who strived for nothing but power and still held a deep grudge against the doctor for insulting their pride, it wasn't long till trouble found the doctor. One day, the doctor cultivated and discovered a rare species of herb. One which would change the world. Able to cure 1,000 diseases, the doctor soon named this the Arose. Isaac heard this, gripping his pockets and feeling the warm sensation humming from the Arose. However, the doctor also discovered a dark secret that came with the Arose. While it was first discovered as a miracle herb, the doctor soon noticed, after countless experiments, the herb's favorability toward blood. When coming into contact with blood, the herb would absorb it at an extreme rate, instantly changing its form. Where it was once a herb used to cure diseases, it would become a drug used to amplify strength and speed by tenfold when ingested. We called it the sanguine. That doesn't sound too bad. Isaac voiced his opinion. You didn't let me finish. Upon ingesting the sanguine, one would experience an immense boost in their vitality and raw power. However, with this strength came the loss of one's sanity. Yes, the sanguine could make you strong, however, it also make you a vicious animal, losing all sense of your humanity. The more blood that was used to create the sanguine, the more strength one would gain, but the side effects would also worsen. The strength would soon wear off, while the sanity returned. However, test subjects were noted to suffer from long-term mental stress. Do they not have a name for PTSD? Because of this, the doctor couldn't allow for the Arose to be used this way. They found it to be unethical and inhumane. However, they were opposed by the entire nation. A nation who would do anything to increase their military power. Because of the doctor's status and power, they were somewhat able to oppose the nation and somewhat win. But, it wouldn't last long. On one fateful night, the doctor died on this very table due to heart complications. It was said they suffered from an incurable heart condition after they left the military. They kept it a secret as not to make others worry. Isaac walked toward the table and quickly noticed a large dusty piece of paper weighed down by two small rocks. The piece of parchment differed from the rest in the room. It had a yellow hue and was noticeably thicker and of higher quality than the others. Once again, the writing was in the same language as the one in Isaac's hideout. One which he was still no closer to understanding. I have a feeling that this isn't the end of the story. Isaac mumbled. You'd be correct. Contrary to what everyone believed, the doctor was not ill, instead, was killed by an assassin. The doctor, born in a nation who had completely opposite ideals to them, would never last long. However, before the doctor died, it was revealed the assassin wasn't sent by the nation she opposed, but instead by one she'd only known by name, far away from them. All that trouble to let another nation potentially make leaps and bounds in power. For what reason? The doctor didn't care about why or who. Instead, their final thought could only be simplified to one word. Scum. All humans cared about was the destruction of their own kind. Fito's voice slowly lowered as her smile faded to a frown of disdain. Why was it that the doctor was the one to suffer after seeking nothing but the peaceful smile of her people? Why was there always an obstacle to stand in their way? An obstacle that would always lead back to the selfish and bloodthirsty humans. It wasn't long until Fito was roaring, her heavy words dripping with contempt. It was like the weight of an elephant had been dropped onto Isaac's shoulders. He struggled to stand, his breath quivering as the air became thicker than usual. The surroundings became colorless as Fito's hair started to elevate. What is this? Thought a sweaty Isaac, trying his best to keep his composure while gritting his teeth. Humans. The very species she sought to help. It was inconceivable. She didn't know who to be mad at, the humans or the gods who created such filth. It was then she realized this world deserved no empathy or kindness. Isaac widened his eyes, hearing her words. The people she devoted her life to didn't deserve her miracles. I would take it all back. With a scream, the weight on Isaac increased again while he lost all ability to breath. Dropping to his knees, he mustered all his strength to yell at the top of his lungs. It was you. The air returned to normal as Isaac could feel his body relax. Hyperventilating and wiping the sweat off his face, he looked up, staring toward Fito as he got up, seeing the innocent smile had returned to her face. While she still faced the piece of paper on the table, he spoke. It was you. You were the doctor. A moment of silence passed as Fito continued soon after. You see, the doctor had all these emotions running rampant inside of her. It was like an undying flame that roared with power even after her death. All of a sudden, a rush of power took over the doctor. At death, she vowed she'd never let her creation be used to harm. Simultaneously, as punishment, she wouldn't let it be used for good either. After all, they didn't deserve it. The doctor took over the city. Isaac's eyes diverted from Fito for a second as a thought arose. The cranium. They belong to you. That's wrong. The cranium doesn't belong to anyone. They only live to protect and guard the doctor's creation. The Arose. So that no one can ever lay their gaze upon it again, let alone use it. Hearing this, Isaac gulped. So what are you? You say you died, yet here you are. Isaac sweated. Think of me as a version of the cranium. I live for the same purpose, only I'm a little more advanced. She smiled, slowly turning her head to Isaac as he flinched a little, knowing what was coming next. And that is the reason why you won't be leaving this room alive, Isaac. Chapter 10, Leaving Ionath 1. I knew there was something odd about you. I just never thought it could be something like this. Isaac stood before Fito as she stared at him, smiling. I'm sorry I had to deceive you. But I can't allow you to live. Isaac stood still, nodding his head. Before that, I'd like to give you something. Isaac slowly reached into his pocket. With rapid movement, he removed a palm-sized unbloomed flower that seemed to be bulging and ready to explode. The smile on Fito's face disappeared for a second as Isaac tossed the plant toward her. With a wave of her hand, the previous mushroom plant stretched toward her, standing before her as a shield as the flower collided with it. With a loud burst of gas, a grey smoke filled the area around the shield, soon corroding the mushroom into ash. To think you'd use my own trick against me. You're trickier than I thought. Looking around, Fito witnessed the absence of her prey. Isaac sprinted toward the elevator, pushing off the ground with all his power as he grit his teeth and cursed himself inwardly. Of course. It's just my luck to encounter the ghost of a vengeful crazy lady. As Isaac yelled in thought, he noticed countless roots bind together and block the entrance to the elevator. Isaac, please. Don't make this any harder than it. Before she could finish, Isaac yelled. I'm not gonna sacrifice myself to make a ghost feel better about her past life. Screw that. As Isaac yelled, he once again withdrew a bulging flower, throwing it at the roots. The roots quickly died, dissolving in the gas. However, while the gas lingered, Isaac was drawing closer and closer. Damn it! Using every ounce of strength he had, he leapt off the ground, compacting himself as much as he could and passing through the gas, and with a loud boom, he crashed into the elevator. Wasting no time, he pulled the lever and watched the elevator door slide closed as bangs and booms could be heard from the other side. Heaving loudly, Isaac was given no time of respite. He slipped out of his large jacket, watching small patches corrode and spread. Please don't turn into ash. Isaac said, trying his best to put out the damage as if it were a spreading fire. The jacket had been with him since day one. He felt bad enough for taking the skeleton's bones and using them as weapons, but now he couldn't even make use of his equipment with it turning to ash. As Isaac panicked, the elevator suddenly came to a stop. As he stumbled a little, he heard a voice. Isaac, the elevator won't move anywhere but up. Please, accept your fate. Fito spoke from an unknown location. Isaac grabbed his bone sword as he looked around. There was nowhere for him to go. The elevator was dark with solid walls trapping him. You must be the only person in existence that tries to kill someone politely. Yelling this, he dug his sword into the wall opposite the lever. Slowly, the plastic started to crack until it shattered. Grabbing his jacket and using it as a shield, he stuffed an unbloomed flower inside the wall. It wasn't long until a release of gas was heard and the crumbling of the wall. Minutes passed as Isaac made sure the gas had dissipated. The jacket was still intact, however, he didn't know how long that would last. Peeking over the jacket, he saw the wall now fashioned a massive hole, big enough for Isaac to crawl through. Quickly slithering through the crevice, Isaac now stood inside a dark large room with countless pillars supporting the dome above. I can find a wall and destroy it. But how would I survive the jump down? Without the elevator, I'm stuck here. Isaac withdrew an Arose, using it as a light source as he began to walk around, looking for anything to help him in the dark area. After a minute of mindless wandering, Isaac took a seat. Even if I do manage to escape, Fito knows where my hideout is. After a few seconds, Isaac thought of something. I need to escape today. I just need to know what path will get me out. I need to take another look from the dome. Isaac scratched his head. He was barely able to escape. The whole dome was Fito's domain. With her plants, it was impossible to last even a minute. His sword skills were a joke and he wasn't nearly fast enough to dodge or endure it. In that second, a flicker of thought entered his mind. Isaac stared at the Arose in his hand, then looked toward the bone sword and finally his arm. That's crazy. Isaac paused. But it's the only way to survive. How do I know it won't kill me? No pain, no gain. Isaac started to think out loud, debating with himself. Screw it. I can either try now and maybe die, or do nothing and definitely die. Isaac held his sword to his arm, below the shoulder. Taking in a deep breath and gritting his teeth as hard as he could, it wasn't long until grunting of discomfort turned into screams of pain. 30 minutes later. The elevator door slid open as Fito stared with a smile, ignoring the large hole. In the next second, Isaac emerged, his face dripping with sweat as he fashioned a forced smile. He wore his large jacket that seemed to have survived, with both arms to his side. The spiral. Fito started, pointing toward the ground where the spiral Isaac had seen all over the city was carved in. It's the insignia of Ionath. It signifies a warrior's beginning and end. And despite the struggles they endure in the middle, they never falter, and the spiral's shape never changes. Thanks for the history lesson. I'm afraid I must leave now. Isaac walked to one of the windows as he looked out. I'm sorry, Isaac. I can't allow you to do that. There's no escaping. Please, accept your fate quietly. Saying this, Isaac could hear the plant life drag across the ground, drawing closer as she raised an arm. When I was a child, not a penny to my name or anyone to call friends or family, I learned a valuable secret on the streets. Fito paused as Isaac looked onto the city, unmoving. The world is unforgiving. I, an orphan, had no place in the world and people around me were sure to treat me that way. Therefore, I strove to gain peace. Peace from humans and from the troubles of the world. I did it the only way I knew how to obtain it. Money. And I used the only weapon I had in my arsenal to get it. Lies. I was never able to obtain that peace. Not before I was almost killed and sent here. But even if I did, what was to say it couldn't all be taken away from me at once? Like it was with you. For all I knew, I could have been wasting my time for something that could become meaningless in the blink of an eye. Why are you telling me this? Fito asked with a smile and her usual innocent tone. Because I might have been wrong about something I was adamant on. So could you. You might be wrong about hating all humans. About them all being scum. You were proof of that. Fito's smile disappeared as she stared at Isaac with a blank expression. Is this a last-ditch effort to attempt to save yourself? She asked, to which he slightly turned his head. Why? Is it working? No. Oh, that's too bad. I guess I'll stick with my original plan. I've bought myself enough time anyway. Isaac turned around, removing his large jacket as Fito's blank expression soon turned into that of rage. Her eyes widened as she bit her lip so hard it bled. What have you done? Isaac removed his jacket, revealing his left arm to be completely shriveled and devoid of any moisture or life. It had turned completely black, like a scab that was days away from falling off. You're just like them. Fito yelled as her hair raised into the air and the aura around them turned ominous. Isaac once again felt as if he were being weighed down by an invisible force, and because of his fatigue, he instantly dropped to the ground with his face crashing into the floor. Your death will be painful and deserving of your inhumanity. Before she could finish her words, she noticed Isaac barely turning his head and revealing a cocky expression, grinning widely as a red glow emanated from between his teeth. Between his teeth, was a blood-red berry with black veins bulging inside of it, a similarly colored liquid dripping from it. Sanguine. Don't. Fito yelled, however, Isaac closed his mouth. Please don't die. With a loud gulp, it wasn't long until Isaac felt an addicting rush of power. Chapter 11, Leaving Ionath 2. The lying body of Isaac turned limp, lifeless as Fito stood frozen, countless emotions running rampant through her. How could I let this happen? She cursed at herself, whispering as her greatest failure lay before her. The ominous aura in the dome had long since calmed, leaving nothing but Fito's single tear falling to the ground. In the next second, Isaac's corpse started to seize violently. The ground shook at the force as his muscles rapidly grew in size. Veins bulged from every corner of his body as his thumping heartbeat played like drums, audible to anyone in the vicinity. His eyes rolled back into his skull as his amber pupils disappeared, and foam oozed from the corner of his mouth. His shirt tore as his muscles had now grown to the size of a professional bodybuilder, bulging as he dug his now healed left arm into the ground. The floor crumbled under his immense strength as Fito wiped the tear off her face. Soon, a smile appeared on her face as the plant life in the area drew closer to the both of them. Determined, she knew she was no longer fighting Isaac but a monster. You were just like them, however, no one deserves to endure pain like that. Fito prayed as Isaac let out a feral howl, the ground shaking with force as he did. Digging his feet into the ground as the concrete below cracked at the pressure, Isaac leapt like a wild predator. Just as quickly, countless vines shielded Fito, barely blocking Isaac's punch as a loud boom echoed in the dome. Without wasting a second, Isaac rapidly tore through the vines, ripping through them like strings, grunting and howling as he tried his best to reach Fito. Fito grimaced as she held out her arm, calling forth a mushroom that shot toward Isaac, expanding as it went until a loud boom was heard and the mushroom slammed into the beast. Jumping back, the vines fell and Fito witnessed Isaac was completely unfazed. Grabbing the mushroom, he hurled it toward her as she leapt through the air like a gazelle, the mushroom barely grazing her. However, before she could even land, Isaac suddenly appeared before her, clasping both hands together and slamming them into Fito's gut. A loud boom was heard as Fito was sent crashing into the ground. Specks of blood escaped from Fito's lips as she struggled to retain the breath that was knocked out of her. She removed a layer of compact, now destroyed plants from beneath her clothes, noticing Isaac charge toward her. Enough! She yelled, sending out countless vines that penetrated through Isaac's arms and legs, holding him in the air. Just as this happened, some color returned to Isaac's eyes as his consciousness also somewhat returned, allowing him to think clearly for a few seconds. Pain. As his consciousness returned, there was one thought in his mind. Pain. It's like an anchor. It brings me out of the madness. With the small bit of sanity he had, Isaac used his strength to rip through the vines holding him in place, trying his best not to be distracted by the raw power he now had in his hands. Landing on the ground, Fito protruded both her arms as countless plant life rocketed toward Isaac. However, in the next second, loud cracks and grunts of suppressed pain could be heard. Fito watched with widened eyes as Isaac twisted his finger, breaking it. "Isaac? How are you?" Fito mumbled, trailing off. Isaac looked to her with a goofy grin as he sweated profusely. "Pain is the touchstone of all humanity. You really think I'd lose my sanity over what looks like raw testicles?" Isaac giggled. Despite his words, as the seconds passed he could feel parts of his sanity and consciousness slipping. His thoughts became more mundane and barbaric, therefore he broke another finger. Fito slowly closed her gaping mouth as she tightened her eyebrows and spoke, "You're lucky the sanguine wasn't potent. This changes nothing. I'll still put you down. Come at me, monster." "I'd love to, but you see, I'm on the clock." Fito didn't know whether to be dumbfounded Isaac had such clarity of the mind, or scared the dome they were standing on started to move. "What have you done?" Fito screeched, stumbling and trying to catch her bearing. "Just know, corrosion paired with pillars supporting a structure is a recipe for disaster." Isaac had used every unbloomed flower he had left to destroy the support of this dome. He wasn't sure it would work, seeing as the pillars were far greater in numbers than his flowers. In the next second, the dome tipped over, sending both Isaac and Fito crashing to the window. Isaac dug his fingers into the ground, halting his fall while Fito was carried by the small amount of plants that hadn't crashed through the window. On its last leg, the dome threatened to plummet to the ground at any second. Grabbing his jacket before he lost it, he noticed a thick yellow piece of paper falling slowly through the air, recognizing it as the piece of parchment Fito kept staring at. He quickly grabbed it, stuffing it into his jacket pocket and looking down to see Fito staring at him with fierce eyes. "Farewell, Dr. Weirdo." Saying this, he used all his strength to pull himself up, destroying the ground with his fingertips and scaling the now vertical structure with immense speed. The dome creaked like an old door, becoming louder by the second. Isaac crashed through the window that now could be seen as the ceiling, pulling himself up and looking down onto the city, remembering which path he had memorized while lecturing Fito. However, his thoughts were foggy and unclear. Twisting another finger, a loud crack was heard as he winced in pain, his mind now clear. The fog in his mind seemed to be lessening, seeing as how he was breaking his fingers far less. However, he could also feel the benefits of the sanguine also decrease. His fingers were healing far slower and his strength seemed to be dwindling. There. He looked to his compass, noticing the direction he was traveling in was the same direction as the unknown being. Despite his previous reluctance, he had no choice. He couldn't memorize a different path in the small time the dome had left before collapsing, and he didn't know how much time was left till the maze reset itself. This was the only chance he had at escaping. Swinging on his jacket, he kicked off the ground, leaping off the dome as he began to free fall off the tower. It seemed this was the last straw for the dome as in the next second, it rolled off the tower, plummeting to the ground on the other side of the tower. Ignoring this, Isaac soon entered the heavy pollen mist as his vision became obscured once again. Because of the darkness paired with the mist, he was lucky he could see at all. Without knowing the distance between him and the ground, Isaac twisted his body mid-air, digging all his fingers into the side of the tower. This failed to break his fall, however, he was dramatically slowed as his fingers tore through the building, leaving frightening marks on it. "Crap, this hurts!" Isaac yelled inwardly, the glass and stone piercing and ripping through his palms. Small holes were created faster than he could heal, until his hands went numb and blood dripped to his face. Just as this was happening, Isaac flinched at the ear-piercing boom of what sounded like the dome crashing into the ground. "This place will be swarming with cranium soon." After a few seconds, he let go, crashing into the ground as his legs vibrated upon impact. Ignoring this, he looked to his compass. He kicked off the ground and entered the first path, running without worrying about stepping on any plant life. Turning a corner, Isaac came face to face with a cranium as it held its arm up. Isaac could hear the vines moving toward him, but he was running too fast for it to catch up to him. Without pausing, he smashed his fist into the Brian sphere head, sending it crashing through a building. "Ack, why did that hurt so much?" Isaac blew his wrist, noticing it might be broken despite the power-up the sanguine was giving him. As he continued to run, Isaac grinned slightly. It was hard to ignore the air smacking across his face as he ran faster than he ever thought possible. Additionally, he didn't feel as though his lungs were burning after a few seconds of sprinting. He turned and soared through the paths with immense speed and sending a few Brian crashing through a building, this time hitting them in the chest and gut rather than the sphere, sometimes coming across compact plant life that would soon lead him to a bundle of Arose he would collect. He focused on the path he had memorized so he wasn't met with any dead ends or paths that diverted him from his escape. "I'm going to do it. I'm going to escape. After so long, I'll be able to gloat before that cocky Orion's face." With every step, it was like Isaac could taste his freedom. The thought of returning to Earth made him giggle and grin as if he were being tickled. His grin grew wider as he drew closer, until he could see the pollen lessening and the air becoming clearer. Despite it still being dark, the absence of the pollen made it seem vastly clearer. "I see it, the end." Isaac ran faster after noticing the path suddenly cut off as the buildings also vanished after a certain point. Leaping for the final time, Isaac stepped out of Ionath for the first time, and then, nothing. What? Where he thought he would be teleported back to Earth, he was instead now standing outside Ionath, before a colossal forest with countless trees mysteriously moving unnaturally, as if it were being shook by powerful winds. Additionally, its razor-sharp leaves and thorn-infested branches were sure to slice anything that came into contact with it. Looking up, Isaac saw nothing, only the bright stars, but in the corner of his eye, between the gaps of the swinging trees, for a second, he caught a glimpse of something he could only describe as a carnivorous volcano. With its tendrils with countless sharp teeth acting as its mouth, it swung and grabbed what looked to be a pterodactyl, stuffing it down its mouth, between the tendrils. The air felt vastly heavier than it did in Ionath. Now it felt as if he were being pricked and prodded by the very oxygen molecules. He could hear distant low groans that echoed through the air, sounds that he could only describe as retching and constant booms that drew closer and closer to him. Even the dirt beneath his feet seemed to be crawling up his feet, nibbling away at him, but he didn't notice. Instead, his heart sank as he dropped to his knees, speaking out loud. "Where the hell am I?" Chapter 12, N 1. Damn it! Isaac, on his knees, smashed both his fists into the ground. Due to the lingering effects of the sanguine, small craters were made where he buried his fists. Isaac grit his teeth as he resisted the urge to yell in frustration. It wasn't due to the fact that the very return to his Earth had slipped away from him, or that he'd now have to traverse his way through further unknown territory after barely surviving Ionath that made him angry. Of course, he wasn't pleased. However, it was more the thoughts and worries he'd buried deep inside himself all this time. The hints throughout his time here had made it abundantly clear Ionath was not the final boss. Peculiar creatures like the rat and the bat being uncommon in Ionath, meaning they had to come from somewhere else. Fito's story of other nations warring and Ionath being a mere nation in the midst of a handful of others, and even the message he was given when he arrived to this world he had remembered a few minutes after awakening in the bush housing the Arose. Survive the Dark Continent. That was his quest. It wasn't to survive Ionath like he had hoped it had been. Isaac had long learned optimism was a weak man's tool. He'd always preferred to take things into his own hands. However, in a case like this, He hated to admit it, but it was painfully obvious. "I'm weak," he muttered. Looking up, Isaac looked around, trying to soak in as much as possible. It was only now he could feel the numbing sensation on his feet, knees, and hands. He quickly noticed the dirt that stuck like glue to his skin. Additionally, the previous booms he had been hearing had drawn closer to him. If it hadn't been for the fact that his ears rang slightly after every boom, he'd probably not have noticed it, seeing as he'd often hear these booms even within the walls of Ionath. Looking to his compass, he checked to see where the needle was pointing, only to find it still facing east, only vibrating slightly, as if it were tempted to point to another direction but couldn't decide. Isaac noticed the other direction the compass was vibrating to was also the direction the loud booms were coming from, which had suddenly stopped. "I doubt it's a cranium. I find it hard to believe they'd stray far from the Arose." Isaac got up to leave, ignoring his sense of curiosity that begged to know what kinds of other beasts lurked what he supposed was called the Dark Continent, but as he tried to get up to his feet, he found the strength in his lower body was completely gone. Dropping to his bottom, he could barely move his toes, let alone get up and run. What the hell? Pressing his hands on the ground to keep himself up, he could also feel them slowly losing strength. It wouldn't be long until he fell to his back. However, he could only stare in the direction of where the booms had disappeared. He couldn't see anything, only the swinging trees and overgrown grass, but he could feel something coming. Now even the compass was unable to pick up anything coming from that direction, only pointing east. It was the same feeling one would get when in the dark as a child, feeling as though something was watching them, drawing closer. Only this time it was real. Not knowing what else to do, Isaac sweated profusely. The mere reflex of breathing heavily when nervous was making him run out of breath in this dense atmosphere, making him hyperventilate. Therefore, Isaac's instincts kicked in, doing the only thing he knew was natural to survive. He held his breath. After a few seconds, something stepped out from below the swinging trees, leaving Isaac dumbfounded. It can't be. "Hey boy!" A rough and heavy voice came from where Isaac was staring. It wasn't long until a man with a wrinkled face, long white beard with a black curled tip, similarly white ponytail and unnaturally long eyebrows falling down the side of his face stepped into Isaac's view. Despite his peculiar appearance, one which Isaac, a street criminal who'd seen every type of alcoholic and drug-addicted crackhead known to man, couldn't take his eyes away from. He also couldn't help notice the man's attire. Wearing nothing but baggy and torn trousers, the muscles on the man's torso contradicted his old demeanor. His chiseled, defined, and bulging muscles were enough to indicate his strength despite his old age. Walking closer to Isaac, the man bent over, coming face to face with the downed boy who seemed frozen. "Boy, what is your name?" asked the man in his graveled voice, to which Isaac's lips started to move subconsciously. "Isaac." Perhaps it was the calming and relaxing aura the man had surrounding him, or maybe it was the thought that anything Isaac were to do would be futile before the man that made the boy so eager to respond. The man raised an eyebrow, soon following it up with the other. "You're really just a boy, aren't you? After all, I doubt any creature around here can use Zetsu. Haha, how have you found yourself in the middle of this hell?" The man chuckled slightly, which Isaac found somewhat calming. "To be honest, I'm not quite sure myself." Isaac answered, however, his words seemed to be weak and slurred, as if he were drunk. The man stood up, rubbing his curled beard, as if he were in thought. "No wonder you're barely able to talk. That may seem like regular dirt, but if you look closely." The man made a zero with his fingers, putting it over his eye. "Those little buggers are alive, eating away at your aura you're so generously offering them." The man smiled, squatting before Isaac once again. "My what?" Isaac said, his eyes threatening to shut. The man stayed silent, keeping a straight face as he stared straight into Isaac's eyes. "You're a peculiar boy, aren't you?" Wrapping his arm around Isaac's waist, the man stood up, carrying Isaac with what seemed to be little effort. "If I were to guess, I'd say you came from that path between those horrid pieces of architecture. If you were able to survive it, it can't be that bad, now can it?" The old man chuckled, walking toward Ionath. Meanwhile, the dirt stuck to Isaac's body seemed to fall off while he felt a wave of energy rush through him. If he were to describe it, it was like taking a sip of cold water on a hot day. He could slowly feel the energy permeate inside him, traversing every crevice of his insides while simultaneously carrying away his fatigue. It was because of this he could find the energy to whisper and mumble to the man. "Don't, we'll die, trapped in maze." Isaac let out with the last drop of energy he had. However, the old man seemed to hear every word. Is that so? Well, I definitely can't turn back now, can I? Responded the man in a cheerful voice while stepping into Ionath. Where is this? This isn't the tower you mentioned. The old man scratched his head as he stepped through the hole in the wall, avoiding the obvious tripwire and looking around to see an empty space with a skeleton missing a leg and scattered debris. It isn't, it's my home, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave, you crazy old man. Isaac wiggled out of the man's grasp, dropping to the ground and crawling away. You were lucky the maze hadn't changed itself so I was able to navigate us home, and we hadn't run into any cranium even after I told you countless times to avoid the plant life. Since re-entering Ionath, Isaac had regained his strength and vitality after he could feel the energy coursing through him. Although, after escaping from the old man's touch, he could feel the energy weakening. That's no way to speak to the man who saved you. Nevertheless, you shan't worry. This maze is oozing with nin. Granted, the rigorous atmosphere will make it hard to focus and the nin in this maze is just that, a pattern itself that needs to be decoded, but I should be able to find a path leading out soon. Saying this, Isaac wore a face of defeat. It's confirmed, this guy's got a few screws loose. He's talking nonsense. This is what Isaac thought, however, he was still open to the possibility that this man was a monster himself. Surviving in the Dark Continent, which seemed to be vastly worse than the insides of Ionath, he definitely wasn't normal. The old man walked around the room, passing the skeleton and soon arriving at the carvings in the wall. Oh! He raised his eyebrows and exclaimed, his mouth shaped like a zero. Stroking his beard, the man ran his fingers through the wall, moving from scene to scene and soon arriving at the small paragraph Isaac had given up on decoding. The suffering caused by those in power births their monstrous karma, a testament to their faults and the pain they've inflicted upon the innocent. The man spoke, his eyes scheming past the words. Isaac's jaw slowly dropped as he stood up, ignoring the fatigue he'd been feeling in his muscles. You can read that? Asked Isaac, frozen in shock. I should be able to. It's a dead language originating from the Mimbo Republic. It was long before my time and is rarely spoken to this day. Mimbo Republic. The old man looked toward the carvings of the compass with a confused look. It shows the direction where the compass should be pointing, said Isaac, holding out his compass as the old man looked to him. This compass points toward the monsters closest to me instead of where it's supposed to be faced. Isaac brandished the compass, showing the needle pointing east. Interesting. I knew I could feel a faint pulse of nin coming from somewhere. Isaac ignored the old man, continuing. Those carvings, they tell a story. A war breaking out while most of the population fled while some people were left behind. Including him. Isaac pointed to the skeleton. He's the one who drew the carvings, and the compass belongs to him. The only thing I can't figure out is the part of the story where the monsters are born. Just as Isaac finished his words, the old man broke out into uncontrollable laughter. Boy, do you know what you've just found? What you've just uncovered? The man asked, to which the confused Isaac shook his head. The man turned back to the carvings, spreading both his arms out. A piece of untold history. A question, me and countless others, have pondered through many sleepless nights. A dark secret finally brought to light. The man yelled. What are you? Post-mortem nin. Chapter 13, Nin 2. Again, that word. What's nin? Isaac asked. He was starting to think he was missing something important. The old man walked to Isaac. You don't know nin? That's ridiculous. There's no way someone who has no concept of nin can survive here. The old man laughed in mockery which further confused as well as angered Isaac. I'm telling the truth. This is the first time I'm even hearing the word nin. Well, what about when we first met? You were using Zetsu to try and hide yourself. Isaac paused. At the time, he did nothing but wait for the man to approach and hold his breath. It seems like Fito was onto something. I've heard that word before, but I don't know what it means. All I did was hold my breath. Netero stared blankly at Isaac, soon opening his mouth. Why don't we make a deal, boy? You tell me how you arrived here and everything that happened to you, and I will tell you what nin is. Deal. The old man stretched out his hand to his Isaac's, to which Isaac stared, soon shaking. Fine, but it isn't as much as you're expecting it to be. I woke up here one day in Ionath, without knowing how I'd arrived. Technically, Isaac was telling the truth. He didn't fully understand how it was possible for him to be magically transported here. Additionally, he thought this was a much easier way of explaining his situation rather than trying to convince the old man he was from another world. Isaac proceeded to explain every detail of what happened since his arrival. The Arose, the connection between the cranium and the plant life, how the cranium spread through pollen and their victims. Soon explaining how he met Fito, the tower, her betrayal, and the sanguine. As Isaac finished explaining how he'd ended up outside Ionath, the old man had his eyebrows raised and jaw wide open. They had long since taken a seat on the ground after Isaac took his time explaining everything. Not much, you say? The old man asked defeatedly. I guess I took my time explaining it. A doctor who was assassinated and became the cranium in order to protect the Arose. Isaac nodded. How intriguing. You've only further proven my theory, boy. The old man smiled. It's your turn now. What's Nen? Ah, of course. Nen is simply one's life energy, their aura. It lives within every living thing, even the air. I believe you've noticed the heavy atmosphere. Isaac quickly nodded his head. It was one of the first things he noticed upon arriving, and still his most hated fact about the Dark Continent. That's because the Nen in the Dark Continent is chaotic and abundant. Usually, Nen runs through the air calmly, however, here, the Nen seems to be at a constant war with itself, making everything fall out of balance. Isaac furrowed his eyebrows. Out of balance? Indeed. You've only been able to notice the lack of oxygen and thick feeling in the air, however, one of the most dangerous things about the Dark Continent is the inability to manipulate Nen like usual. The atmosphere has a peculiar effect on one's Nen, making it heavy and viscous, therefore harder to manipulate, near impossible to learn to control before being met with danger. Isaac nodded. So Nen can be used like a weapon in order to protect oneself. That's certainly useful. Are you able to still use it? Asked Isaac, to which the old man wore a smile of pride and answered. Yes, I can. Although, I'll admit not to my fullest capabilities. However, when one reaches the mastery of Nen that I have, it's certainly possible. Isaac stayed quiet. Since he was just learning of Nen, he had no idea whether this was an impressive accomplishment or not. So what's the other thing you mentioned? Post-mortem Nen. Ah, yes. Quite the pondered upon discovery. Even at my old age, I've only seen it occur a few times. When one's desires are desperate and strong enough, even at death, their Nen takes form and manifests itself. In this case, the doctor's desire to protect the Arose and prevent the destruction that would occur upon mass production of the sanguine allowed her Nen to become reborn in the form of the cranium. A thought flickered through Isaac's mind. Wait a minute, if that's the case, then why did the ghost of Fito exist? What was her purpose? The old man said nothing, only smiling. I don't know. You were the one who spent the most time with her. You tell me. Isaac looked down for a few seconds, in thought. He remembered the backstory Fito told him, the reason for everything being the way it was. Her reason for bringing him to the tower. After a few seconds, he spoke. I think that was just a part of Fito who wanted to tell her story. One which felt reluctant to die under false pretenses, without anyone ever knowing what happened. The old man continued to smile. Well done, said the man simply while Isaac rummaged through the pockets of his large jacket and pulled something out. Can you read this too? Isaac pulled a thick piece of yellow parchment from his jacket pocket, handing it to the old man. After a few seconds, the old man proceeded to read the contents on the paper, sometimes stuttering and staring at the word for a few seconds before answering. The war is drawing closer. Tensions between the kingdoms are rising, and the thirst for power within Ionath continues to grow. I fear the Arose will not be safe for long. Despite my reluctance to give in and give the Arose, I sometimes wonder if it's the right thing to do in today's world. The war is inevitable, this is only the lull before the storm. Do I owe it to my people, is this my part in the impending battle, to assist with the Arose as much as possible? If I do, and we win the war, what then? Wouldn't the Arose be used for what I fear when we enter a time of peace? The headaches only continue to worsen as I ponder the future. How I wish I could take control, only for a day. The old man ended, placing the parchment on the ground. Take control, like the cranium. He pointed out. Not just that. The war she mentions. What if it's the same one carved into the wall? What if the two stories are connected? Isaac asked, pointing to the wall. It's possible. The fear with which she speaks of the war could mean it was big, meaning there would be enough deaths for post-mortem monsters to take over, pushing out the humans. The theory, despite sounding plausible, was horrific. Countless soldiers dying with burning desires, only to become reborn into monsters and slay their own. It still doesn't make sense. Fito mentioned this nation was one that experienced countless battles. It even resulted in them building a whole city just to gain a tactical advantage. So what was so different about this war that everything went to shit? A thought then occurred to Isaac. If Fito died and her post-mortem and activated before the war started, it could explain why Ionath experienced so much loss. Fito, or the cranium, destroyed it from the inside. It's a possibility. The man mumbled after a few seconds. Boy, you've found something truly important. Tell me, what is your goal? Asked the old man. Isaac, despite being confused by the sudden change of subject, answered truthfully. To survive. The old man said nothing. After a few seconds, his smile returned. Believe it or not, without the use of Nen, you'll die once stepping foot outside this city. You were lucky the enemy was the Brian, who only see using the plants. Every other beast I've encountered will be able to detect the tranquil Nen in your body, oozing outside you. You'll stick out like a sore thumb. Isaac was both pleased and heartbroken to hear this. Yes, it provided him with a better chance at surviving, but his survival was also becoming more and more complicated by the second. What am I supposed to do about that? It's simple. It's a technique I created for the Dark Continent specifically. In order to blend in, seem as though you're nothing more than the air, you must imitate it. The Nen in the air is rough and vigorous, therefore, you control your Nen to be rough and vigorous. Where you would usually control your Nen so that it doesn't leak out of your body, this time, stop the leak, but also train your Nen to be passively chaotic and unfriendly. The old man stood up, walking behind Isaac and holding out his hand. Hey, what are you doing? Asked a flustered Isaac. Look straight ahead. You want to learn Nen, don't you? Saying this, Isaac grimaced, soon looking straight ahead. However, nothing happened. Yes. Then I'll teach you. Chapter 14, Nen 3. The old man stayed silent, placing his palm on Isaac's back, and it wasn't long until Isaac felt like the temperature was rising. What the f***ck? Isaac yelled inwardly, barely able to piece together his thoughts. In an instant, he felt a burn sensation run through his body. His muscles contracted, beads of sweat poured down his face and his insides felt like a furnace. He could tell the old man was barely touching him, yet he felt immense pressure coming from his back. All he could do was yell as the pressure increased and the force being driven into his body had reached every crevice. It wasn't long until the pressure subsided, and the ability to move returned to Isaac. On his hands and knees, he struggled to catch his breath and clear the fog in his mind, but despite that, it still wasn't enough to distract him from the new sensation he was feeling. He felt different. He could feel something gushing out from every part of his body, flooding away like an open faucet. Not only that, he could see it. The white aura surrounding him dissipated into the air and it floated further and further away from his body. Additionally, he could feel this same energy lingering in the air, different from his flowing aura. Instead, the aura in the air was rapid, unstopping, and clashing with itself. How does it feel? I've just opened all the aura nodes in your body. The old man spoke, bringing Isaac back from his trance. Isaac looked back, pausing slightly after staring at the old man's aura. His eyes widened at the difference between his aura and the man's. The old man's aura wasn't leaking like Isaac's, but coating his body. However, what surprised him was the similarity between the rapid and chaotic nature of the atmosphere and the old man's Nen. He could only tell the difference when he looked at the aura surrounding the old man being frantic. However, if he closed his eyes and were to sense the aura around him, he wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. The old man was hiding in plain sight. Isaac looked at the old man's face, only to notice his similarly shocked face presented on the old man, as if he had just realized something, completely switching his demeanor from earlier. The man had his mouth slightly open, as if he wasn't able to close them, his eyes widened and his hand unmoving from the same position since Isaac had awakened his aura. Your aura, it's normal. It's like your body is ignoring the negative effects of the Dark Continent. How are you doing that? The old man was dumbfounded. Something he'd thought to be near impossible, even for someone like him, was being done seamlessly before him. I'm not doing anything? What does this mean? Is there something wrong with me? Isaac fell into a slight panic. Yes, there is. But it's a good thing. You'll be able to use Nan like normal, without the atmosphere interfering. Isaac let out a satisfied smile as well as relieved demeanor. Cool. Doesn't that mean, hey, don't try and distract me from what just happened. You ought to warn someone before you pull a trick like that, you crazy old man. Isaac yelled, seconds away from tearing the old man's long eyebrows off. I didn't think you'd say yes. How would you have felt if I told you this was an unethical practice that is highly frowned upon and extremely dangerous? Forcing one's aura nodes open is like ripping a premature child from the womb. Isaac stood dumbfounded, only staring as his jaw laid open, completely forgetting about the man's aura upon hearing this. Don't look so shocked. It worked, didn't it? And to think, this was my first time doing it. I really am a natural, aren't I? The old man laughed obnoxiously while Isaac cursed him inwardly. You've just earned yourself a spot beside that stupid Orion. You'll both be crushed beneath my feet. Isaac could only stare crazily at the old man while biting his lip. Also, if I were you, I'd get that Nan under control. If it keeps rushing from your body like that, you'll collapse due to fatigue. The old man mentioned. Isaac scratched his head. How? It's simple. Close your eyes. Isaac did as he was told. Visualize the Nan flowing through your body, like blood coursing through your veins. From your head to your shoulders, to your abdomen and down to your toes. Feel the aura swirl inside you, in a constant spiral. The old man said this, however, the Nan was still seeping from Isaac's body, and Isaac wore a face of discomfort. It's not working. He mumbled. You need to focus, boy, said the old man. I'm trying. The old man stared at Isaac with a neutral demeanor, soon sighing. Boy, relax. This technique is not easy to learn. It takes most months to master. You'd have to be a monster to accomplish it after a few simple instructions. Hearing this, Isaac could only grit his teeth as his heart sank. He needed months so that he could even have a chance at surviving outside Ionath. Well, are you? Isaac's ears perked. Are you a monster, or are you a boy in over his head, crawling in a desperate attempt to escape the monsters in the dark room? Isaac said nothing, keeping his eyes closed but yelling internally. No. I doubt you are anything more than a boy who only survived due to luck. That's wrong. You were lucky you woke up in Ionath. You were lucky you happened to find a bed of plants to keep you satiated. And you were lucky the doctor told you of the only escape before you went mad in this labyrinth. No. You don't stand a chance in the Dark Continent. You're wrong. Isaac finally let out. The old man paused. Then prove it. Prove me wrong. Isaac wasn't angry at the harsh words of the man, or the fearful possibility that he wasn't going to survive his quest, but rather at the truth of them. The truth was, he was lucky. Everything he'd accomplished to this day was only because external circumstances allowed it. That's bullsh*t. Up to this day, Isaac had done nothing but struggle. From scavenging for a single penny to suffering under the cruel heel of the world, Isaac had been anything but lucky. He didn't want it either. Luck, optimism, hope. These were all things Isaac came to despise. Not because he didn't have any, but instead because they were the crutches for a weak **ssy. Screw luck. I'll control my own destiny. Focusing on the aura in his body, it wasn't long until Isaac was engaged in a fierce battle. Meanwhile, the old man sat silently, attempting to forcefully control his aura with sheer will. How unorthodox, as well as foolish and dangerous. He thought, soon smiling widely like a maniac. And bloody brilliant. Isaac felt like his muscles were tearing, like his flesh was coming undone and insides were being sent into a frenzy, but he didn't care. He'd be damned if it took him months to control something as trivial as this. Soon, the aura leaking from his body stopped, instead coating every inch of his body like invisible clothes. Well done. The old man clapped. Isaac. Chapter 15, Training 1. Isaac dropped to his buttocks, breathing heavily as he stared at his arms and body. He had done it. His body was now coated from head to toe by what felt like a viscous liquid. Similar to the atmosphere feeling like oil on his skin. However, the difference was, the Nan in the atmosphere pressing against his skin always felt unfamiliar, as if an unknown entity was forcefully invading his personal space. Now, however, he felt as if he were in the comfort of his own home. "I did it," Isaac declared in between breaths. The old man smiled. "That was a risky move you pulled there. You've got guts, that's for sure." Isaac was barely able to let out a cocky smile. He knew what he did was great. He felt like he was close to death during the process. "But yes, congratulations. You have learnt the ability 10. Isaac raised an eyebrow. "This is called 10? What's that thing called?" "The thing you're doing with your aura." The old man looked as if he was about to say something, but paused. "Well, now that you mention it, I haven't given this technique a name yet. No matter, I shall explain the basics of Nen to you. Listen closely." Isaac sat with his legs crossed and stared at the man. "There are 4 basic principles of Nen. The first is 10. It allows you to stop the leakage of Nen from your body and even gives you slight resistance to Nen-based attacks and physical damage." The old man started, smiling as he spoke. "I believe you are already familiar with Zetsu. Its ability to turn off all your aura nodes, so that you may hide from other Nen users." Isaac nodded. "It's why you were able to hide from the cranium when holding your breath. If the cranium had the ability to sense Nen and had not solely relied on the vegetation, you'd have been a goner." The old man laughed saying this, to which Isaac could only wear a face of defeat. "Moving on, we have Ren. To use Ren, one must increase the output of Nen, resulting in an exponential increase in both your physical strength and durability." Isaac slowly started to smile. He remembered how exhilarating and powerful he felt when eating the sanguine, and now he had the chance to repeat those effects without the negative side effects. "That's great. That'll help us in surviving." Before Isaac could finish, his fantasies soon came crashing down on him. "Boy, have you already forgotten the consequences of having uncontrolled Nen?" The old man cut him off. "Releasing such a level of Nen at once is suicidal. You might as well send all the creatures around you a letter with your location on it." The old man mocked. Isaac stayed quiet as he thought. "One of the most useful abilities in my arsenal and I can't even use it." "Great." Isaac shook his head. "The last technique is Hatsu. However, you need not worry about that whilst in the Dark Continent. There's no effective way to train it without alerting everything around you." Saying this, the old man walked toward the hole in the wall as he began to step out. "Where are you going?" asked Isaac while putting a pause on his wild thoughts. "Why, I'm leaving of course," answered the man with an indifferent tone without looking back. "Is it right to assume I'm not going with you?" asked Isaac, seeing the man's peculiar attitude. He didn't know how to feel about the man leaving him here. On one hand, he felt the old man's rash and nonchalant behavior would lead him to his doom. However, on the other hand, in the past hour, it was clear to Isaac that the man could be an invaluable asset in surviving the Dark Continent. "Well, you aren't going anywhere with me like you are now." With his bare foot on the edge of the wall, the old man turned around and held out 2 fingers. 2 weeks? What? I'll be waiting outside Ionath, where we met, for 2 weeks. In that time, you must master the art of being invisible in the Dark Continent. Control your 10 and imitate the surrounding Nen. Become a ghost and hide in plain sight. If you can't accomplish such a simple task in that time." The old man's eyes suddenly turned cold as he spoke with a flat tone. "You'll be nothing more than a nuisance." Isaac could feel the atmosphere drastically change as the man's words echoed in the room. Without warning, an outburst of, what Isaac could only describe as bloodlust, shot out from the old man, colliding with Isaac as his legs trembled and his 10 shook, seconds away from falling apart. Isaac's legs trembled as he barely stood straight. Frozen, he felt vulnerable and weak. All he could feel was the heartbeat quickening, threatening to leap out of his chest. "I've felt this before. From Fito." Isaac gritted his teeth as he thought. Despite the similarities, the old man's aura seemed to be vastly more powerful. If it weren't for the 10 that seemed to be acting as a shield, Isaac was sure he'd suffocate and be crushed by the aura. Suddenly, after what felt like hours, the aura had dispersed, leaving as fast as it came. Sweating profusely, Isaac dropped to his knees as he breathed heavily. His mental and physical state had been through hell in the last 24 hours. From creating and eating the sanguine and fighting Fito, to unlocking his aura nodes and now suffering under such pressure, Isaac was holding back the urge to drop to the ground and fall into a long coma. "Your 10 is still weak. You are nowhere near ready to venture outside Ionath." As the old man prepared to leap through the hole, Isaac stopped him. Wait. Your name? What's your name? Isaac blurted out with the last drop of energy he had. Isaac felt it was only right he should know the name of such an individual who had saved his life. Besides, he was starting to get tired of referring to the man by old man. Have I not told you? The man blinked. After a second, the old man smiled as if he suddenly understood a joke from the past. Fate sure is strange. Isaac raised an eyebrow at the strange sentence. My name is Isaac Netero. Saying this, the man leapt out of the hole. Isaac stood frozen as he blinked a few times. Isaac! An old man leapt from one plain white building to another, soon coming to a stop as he looked back to a certain building in the distance with a hole in the wall. Perhaps I was too harsh on him. Netero questioned himself. He brought his index finger and thumb together, making a zero shape and holding it over his eye while closing the other. Netero didn't regret giving Isaac 2 weeks to train in order to survive outside Ionath, however, he lied. In truth, this technique was anything but simple. To train your 10 to be chaotic and rampant was extremely taxing on the physical body, as well as the aura nodes. Even with his near-perfect mastery of Nen, it still took him a few days to master this technique. I wonder. He didn't know why he held such high expectations for a boy he's known for less than a day. Perhaps it was the resolve and grit he witnessed whilst watching the boy master 10. Or maybe the surprise at the fact the boy was not only able to survive in Ionath without Nen, but also uncover a large piece of history that was once shrouded in mystery. Either way, to say Netero was anything short of giddy would be a lie. To think, I'd meet someone so interesting here of all places. Netero chuckled lightly, turning around while still keeping his gaze on the building from the corner of his eye. In truth, Netero had also told 2 lies when speaking with the boy. It's a good thing he doesn't know who I am. Leave him? As a soon-to-be chairman of the Hunters Association, that would be a disgrace. Saying this, Netero disappeared into the dark Ionath. Staggering toward the corner of the room, Isaac dropped to the ground in exhaustion. With his back on the wall, he recalled the previous interaction with Netero. 2 weeks. Could he really do it? He'd already seen firsthand how difficult it was to master his 10. Therefore, he questioned whether or not 2 weeks would be enough time to master the invisibility technique. Taking a deep breath, Isaac exhaled. He did know one thing for sure. He couldn't stay in Ionath. In order to complete his quest as quickly as possible, he needed to dive face first into the Dark Continent. And with what Netero had shown him, he'd have a better chance at surviving under him. In 2 weeks, I have to be outside the walls of Ionath. Saying this, Isaac rummaged in his pockets and quickly gulped down an Arose, quickly feeling a wave of vitality wash over him. However, that wasn't all. Isaac widened his eyes. He could feel something else. Something new. Something he couldn't sense before due to not being able to sense Nen. What is this? Chapter 16, Training 2. In a dark, misty, and empty city, silence prevailed. Other than the crisp sound of plants and vegetation moving around, most likely due to the snake-like vines traveling through them, and the faint footsteps of the sphere-headed creatures, one would only have the voice in their minds to keep them sane. On the outskirts of the city, a man sat with his legs crossed and his eyes closed. As the man sat, hours would turn into days, while days turned into weeks. As if he had lost track of time, the man wouldn't move from his position. One would assume he were dead, however, if they were to look closely, the man's chest rose and retracted rhythmically every now and then. It wasn't until loud footsteps could be heard coming from the city that he finally opened his eyes. From the city, the old man first noticed bright amber eyes peering at him from the darkness. Walking out, a young boy with messy black hair that fell to all sides of his face and bright amber eyes walked out wearing a large jacket and cargo pants, both with spiral patterns adorned on them. He also had what seemed to be a bone sword resting on his hip. No words were spoken between the youth and old man as the boy walked closer. In the next second, an outburst of bloodlust exploded outward from the old man, assaulting the boy. However, surprisingly, the boy seemed unfazed. Taking another step, the boy walked closer to the man, unobstructed by the immense aura, until he soon came face to face with the man. In an instant, the bloodlust had retracted as the old man stood up. "I knew you could do it!" yelled the old man with a laugh, slapping the youth on his back. Isaac smiled as he inwardly yelled in agony at the pain of Netero's slaps. Netero felt satisfied as he stared at the chaotic and unpredictable aura surrounding Isaac, almost identical to his, but less dim and faint. "Hey, Watch it, old man. Every inch of my body is aching thanks to this stupid technique. Isaac complained. That's nothing but the plump fruits of your achievement. You should be proud of yourself. Well, like you said. It was simple. Netero paused as he heard this, raising an eyebrow. Simple. Yet. I'll admit, it took me longer than I would have liked. Isaac rubbed the back of his head. How long did it take you, exactly? Asked Netero, squinting his eyes. 10 days. Netero widened his eyes and raised his eyebrow as he heard this. 10 days? And you made me wait 4 extra days for nothing. Netero didn't know whether to commend Isaac or slap him over the head. Well, I still needed to find my way out of that maze. I'm still Newton, and so it was hard to navigate through the city with just my newfound sense for it. As Netero nodded in understanding, Isaac rummaged through his pockets and handed him something. An Arose? What for? Asked Netero. Eat it. You'll see. Netero raised an eyebrow, however, he soon shrugged as he downed the Arose. He didn't mind finding a source to replenish his vitality and hunger other than Nan. As Netero swallowed, he shot his eyes wide open as Isaac smiled, watching the old man's aura expand, growing 10 times larger than that of Isaac's. Holy crap, so strong! Isaac thought. This. Netero clenched his fists as he couldn't think of any words to describe what he was feeling. His Nan was no longer burdened by the dark continent's atmosphere. It was like he was back in the known world, where Nan was normal. Closing his eyes, Netero controlled his Nan, suppressing it so that it was similar to that of Isaac's. I figured out why my Nan was ignoring the effects of the atmosphere. It's because of the Arose. Isaac spoke while Netero was still surprised. Fito once told me that the Arose shouldn't be eaten this way, and that it was a miracle I was alive after doing so. At first, I didn't know what she meant, but after my aura nodes were opened, I could feel the Arose had a peculiar effect on my Nan. It was like the Arose slowly converted my Nan into gas, making it lighter and even more vaporous. As Isaac said this, Netero's voice soon followed. The exact opposite effect of the atmosphere. He looked toward Isaac. Exactly. Both side effects cancel each other out. Isaac grinned as exclaimed. To say Netero was lost for words would be an understatement. Frozen as he thought. This changed everything. Hey, Mr. Netero. Are you okay? Isaac asked, seeing the man's frozen state. With a cough, Netero regained his composure. Ah, yes. Well done, boy. You've impressed me. Now, enough chatter. We must leave now before any creatures that were attracted to my bloodlust arrive. Netero turned around. Isaac nodded his head as they both looked toward the trees before them that swung vigorously with razor-sharp leaves. Isaac looked down, seeing the dirt did not have the same effect on him that it did when he first trod on it. To this, he smiled. This really does work. Stupid dirt. Isaac mumbled, kicking the dirt. However, before following Netero, Isaac noticed something that left a bad feeling in his gut. Looking to his compass, he was quick to notice the needle still pointing east, away from the city. I don't understand. Is the creature not in Ionath? Thinking of the possibility that there may be a creature able to attract the compass needle from so far away made Isaac shudder. Whatever. At least we aren't traveling in that direction. Looking back, Isaac stared at the tall walls of Ionath. Despite everything that had happened, he was glad he had arrived inside the city, rather than out here. It was then that he noticed a figure standing between the plain white walls. Squinting his eyes, it wasn't long until his heart sank and he became frozen. What's wrong, boy? Looking back, Netero noticed Isaac's flustered demeanor. Following his gaze, his eyes fell upon a female with green hair and one green eye while the other was heavily damaged, dripping with blood. Her clothes were torn as her face was that of agonizing pain mixed with unrelenting rage, as evidenced by her grinding teeth that were audible to Isaac and Netero. Fito. Isaac mumbled. You're just like the rest of them. You don't deserve my help. Ungrateful demons. Fito fell into a rant, her voice low yet still heard by the two individuals not far from her. As Isaac watched, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Forget it. Her post-mortem Nan is bound to the city. She can't leave. Otherwise, she would have long pounced at you. Netero said, prompting Isaac to return to his previous calm demeanor. All right. Saying this, the both of them turned their heads, walking away from the city. You you! Grinding her teeth, Fito yelled. Don't you dare ignore me! You will pay for your sins! Saying this, Fito let out a blood-curdling scream as an explosion of aura erupted from her. It seemed the atmosphere had no effect on her, seeing as how her aura had reached heights Isaac had never seen before. With a dark green hue, the aura flooded to the surroundings. If Isaac wasn't protected by his 10, he was sure he'd be crushed under such pressure. Is she crazy? Isaac, quickly! We must leave! Netero hurried Isaac as he turned his head, dashing toward the patch of clearing between the dangerous trees. Glancing at Fito one last time as she glared at him with contempt, Isaac turned his head, trying his best to keep up with Netero as they disappeared into the dark continent. As they did, Isaac looked up, his breath freezing as his eyes widened and his jaw dropped. Countless winged bone creatures, some bigger than others, the smallest being a little bigger than him, with large jaws and sharp teeth could be seen flocking and speeding at the speed of Formula 1 race cars toward Fito's location. If creatures from that distance can sense the aura. Isaac shuddered at the thought of what monsters from every corner of this hell would appear here soon. Seeing no end to the boned flying creatures, Isaac decided to clench his teeth and concentrate his attention on his invisible 10. Isaac dropped to his knees as he breathed heavily, sweat dripping from his face as Netero stood over him. He was so tired he failed to notice the peculiar plant life around them. Including one plant with tendril-like appendages spread out, as if it were ready to grab onto whatever neared it. And even the countless dull and shriveled trees with dark and unappealing apples hanging from them. Isaac had long since lost track of how long they'd been running. They had only stopped because Isaac was close to collapsing. Looking up, Isaac contorted his face in confusion after witnessing the old man's calm and indifferent demeanor, as if he'd been sitting on a couch all day without lifting a finger. Meanwhile, between the concentration of keeping the invisibility 10 active and trying his best to conserve his stamina, Isaac was both mentally and physically fatigued. However, he couldn't help but notice how much his stamina had improved since the day he'd first arrived. He could barely sprint for a few seconds at first. Perhaps it was the Nin that was improving his physical attributes, but if he were to make an assessment, he'd say he was amongst the likes of top-level athletes back on Earth. Would you like one? Isaac held out an Arose as he prepared to stuff one in his mouth. No, thank you. Netero answered simply while Isaac squinted his eyes. What will you eat? Now that I think about it, what have you been eating this whole time you've been here? A thought came to Isaac as he asked. Minen. Let's just say I can go for long periods of time without needing to be satiated. That's useful. I'll need to learn that. Besides, this environment is good training for Minen control. I'd rather make the best of this situation. Netero chuckled as he pushed back my hand. Isaac stared at the man, dumbfounded. What kind of crazy man had he come across for him to be thinking of such things in a situation like this? Isaac stayed silent as he stared, soon taking both Arose and placing it back in his pocket. As Netero raised an eyebrow, Isaac spoke. Me too. I'll train with you. Teach me. A pause erupted as Netero soon let out a wide grin. I like your guts, boy. Chapter 17, First Battle 1. Isaac sat with his legs crossed and eyes closed as he wore a face of discomfort while sweating profusely. His breath was uneven as Netero sat behind him, his palm on the boy's back. If one could see the aura emanating from the both of them, they'd be able to witness Netero's thin layer of aura shrouding the both of them as it jumped and wriggled in a chaotic manner. It wasn't long until a similarly colored aura slowly started to emanate from Isaac's body, soon coating his skin and moving in the same way as Netero's aura. In the next second, Netero placed his hands off Isaac's back as the boy slumped forward, trying his best to catch his breath. Well done, boy. You're now able to use Nin in the Dark Continent, albeit barely. Commented Netero, staring at the near-transparent layer of white aura coating Isaac's body. Isaac put his thumbs up, unable to speak as he found comfort on the man eating dirt. It had been a week since Isaac had requested Netero to train him. Only now was he able to use Invisible 10 without the help of the Arose. In the past week, he constantly trained as Netero hid the both of them by expanding his Nin, something that he only seemed to invent on the spot. Despite Isaac being proud of his achievements, he could only watch in defeat as he witnessed the old man casually perform what took him many sleepless nights. How long will it take me to get to that level? However, despite his current appearance, Isaac could feel his connection to Nin strengthening. His control and mastery of it was now more refined and smooth. He was incomparable to himself from a week ago. He could feel it. He was getting stronger. I wonder how strong the Golden Six are. Isaac pondered, remembering the group Catelyn made such a fuss over. At first, he didn't care about whoever the Golden Six were. However, he found it somewhat amusing to compare himself to the best. Isaac let out a sigh. For all he knew, this was wishful thinking. They were the best for a reason. How long did it take you to get to that level of Nen Master? Isaac asked, finally catching his breath. Turning his head, Netero chuckled as he sat beside Isaac, looking into the distance for a few seconds, as if he were reminiscing, then answered. All of my youth, and then some. Isaac couldn't help but feel slightly shocked, as well as disheartened when hearing this. I have to wait till I'm that old to reach such mastery. You might as well laugh in my face and say it's impossible. But hey, you can never be too old to still surpass your limits. This place isn't the best, but we might as well make use of its advantageous atmosphere. Netero nudged Isaac as he smiled. Similar to how a child would smile when opening presents on Christmas Day. Now that I think about it, why are you here? You haven't told me. The most Netero had told Isaac was that he came from a far land in the middle of a lake. Netero paused for a second, soon speaking. I'm looking for someone. Netero answered simply. Isaac raised an eyebrow as this seemed out of character for the chatty old man. Who? A friend. How do you know they're here? Because I'm the reason he's stuck here. It's my fault. Isaac knew he was acting like the nosy Karens that would always make his scams harder whenever he encountered them. However, this information could be what he needed to complete his quest and go back home. He knew Netero must have gotten to the Dark Continent somehow, and he wouldn't be dumb enough to arrive without having a way back. If he could figure out what that was and how he could leave this hell, he might just have a chance at completing his god-forsaken quest. However, before he could ask anything else, he noticed Netero's dark and complicated expression as he looked toward a far bush of vegetation. We have company. Following Netero's line of sight, Isaac's eyes fell upon the usual peculiar plants that they had gotten used to. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Looking down at his compass, he noticed the needle pointing toward where they were facing rather than the usual east. In the next second, something came into view as Isaac's eyes slowly widened and his heartbeat quickened. Before them, standing upright was a 7-foot insect-like creature. With large black beads for eyes, long antennas, 4 insectoid limbs, shiny exoskeleton with plush pink gaps between them and a set of human-like teeth, the creature stood unmoving as Isaac took a step back. This was the first time he was coming face to face with a creature outside Ionath. Compared to the cranium which had a few discernible weaknesses, he knew nothing about this insect. Snapping him out of his trance, an old raspy voice echoed in Isaac's ear. It seems we were a bit too careless when training. Isaac, this particular old man has suddenly come down with a pained back. Be a good student and defeat this monster. No Arose allowed. Netero spoke in a painful and strained tone, irking Isaac as it was obviously fake. Hey, wait a minute. Before Isaac could finish, the insect creature leapt at him with incredible speeds. Taken aback, Isaac was barely able to yank out his bone sword and hold it up to defend himself. In the next moment, the insect's claws clashed with the sword as a loud clang echoed through the area. In the same second, Isaac was sent skidding on the ground and soon coming to a stop as he winced in pain. So strong. His ten was able to resist small amounts of physical damage, however, it wasn't enough. He knew if he were hit with an attack like that, he'd be in trouble. Isaac picked himself up, trying to catch his breath as he noticed from the corner of his eye the absence of a particular white-haired old man. However, before he could have a moment of respite and curse his mentor, the insect dug its feet into the ground and soon once again swung its claws toward Isaac. Isaac, this time prepared, tried his best to keep his eyes on the creature. By no means was he a skilled fighter, let alone a swordsman. Being a con artist, Isaac relied on his wits and preparation to survive on Earth. Therefore, he would rarely need to engage in a physical altercation. However, he didn't need to be a martial artist to see and track the insect's claw as the creature pulled back its attack for maximum power. Because of this, he was able to guess the trajectory and swiftly evaded the attack with a duck. Holding his sword close to his body, lunged at the creature, his sword aiming to stab the creature's eye. However, the creature was too fast. It easily turned its head as the sword slashed past it. Once again, pulling its arm far back, it swung at Isaac, to which he jumped, acrobatically leaping over the claw as if he were in the Olympics. The both of them then engaged in a viscous back and forth, where Isaac would watch and dodge the attacks, then counter-attack toward the eyes almost every time. He had attempted to pierce through the exoskeleton of the insect, however, the vibration traveled through his whole body as he declared to not try again. Meanwhile, in a nearby bush, a man watched intently as he stroked his beard every so often. He's doing better than expected. However, if this keeps going, he'll run out of stamina. Isaac also knew this, as he could feel his breathing becoming harder and harder. As Isaac ducked another claw, instead of lunging with his sword like usual, he swung his bare hand. Special attack, man-eating dirt. Isaac tossed a handful of dirt into the creature's eyes as it flinched and took a step back. However, the creature didn't need eyes to remember the very obvious attack pattern of the boy. Additionally, the heavy breath and loud footsteps gave him away. The insect covered its eyes with both hands, prepared to end the battle with grabbing the bone sword and taking the only weapon the human had. Cree! The insect let out a pained screech as one of its arms lay on the ground. The man-eating dirt quickly devoured the arm as it soon disappeared. Netero watched with his mouth open in a zero shape and raised eyebrows. Interesting. He purposefully devoted every attack toward the creature's eyes in order to trick it when it was blinded, instead attacking the gap-jointed devoid of any protection. Netero would clap if he didn't want to expose his position. He was thoroughly impressed. Not yet. Meanwhile, Isaac dug his feet into the ground, summoning all the strength he could muster as he leapt at the distracted creature, swinging his sword toward the gap in its neck. However, upon contact, the bone sword snapped like a dry stick striking a boulder. Losing his footing and stumbling, the creature stared at him as bloodlust oozed from it. Raising its arm, it was ready to decapitate Isaac, to which he widened his eyes and yelled inwardly. Crap, I'm dead. Chapter 18, First Battle 2. Crap, I'm dead. Isaac held inwardly as he witnessed the claw of the bloodlust insect slash through the air, drawing closer. However, instead what came was a loud boom as the insect shot through the air, crashing through all plant life and creating a gaping hole in the once thick and lush vegetation, soon disappearing into the darkness. Isaac, his eyes widened and jaw dropped, slumped down onto his buttocks, staring at Netero who now stood where the insect was a few seconds ago. To any regular person, it would have looked as if the insect had just rocketed through the air, the most likely reason being it had run. However, because Isaac could see and sense none, he was able to tell. He had barely seen it. If it weren't so clear and vivid in his mind, he'd have thought he was mistaken. A golden hand? Isaac questioned, his expression still the same. Ho ho, I guess you saw that, didn't you? Chuckled Netero with his usual smile. The same type of smile the elderly would give when pinching the cheeks of their grandchildren. It was pretty hard to miss. Mumbled Isaac, slowly coming out of his trance. You, my boy, have just witnessed Hatsu. The manifestation of one's nin. However, I try not to use it, seeing as it draws too much attention. Saying this, a rumbling suddenly erupted as the ground quaked. Isaac looked to his compass, seeing it pointing north. Something was coming. Smashing the trees in its way, a large and muscular bull-like creature with snakes for horns, 4 large eyes and sharp teeth charged toward the two of them as Isaac prepared to run. However, Netero stood still as he placed both his hands together, as if he were praying. Before Isaac could question him, he witnessed a familiar large golden hand appear from thin air, smacking the bull with its palm. As if it were a fly being swatted, the bull was sent soaring through the air, crashing through the forest creating another hole that could be seen from a bird's eye view. To say Isaac was surprised would be an understatement. However, he had no time to ask questions as Netero turned and began to run. This is why we never use our nin. Once this happens, an endless swarm of beasts will emerge which he will be forced to battle. Saying this, Isaac remembered the loud booms before he'd met Netero. It was clear he was speaking from experience. I'm not one to run from a fight, but even I can tell when I'm outmatched. I learned that during my first time coming to the Dark Continent. Isaac could only gulp as he tried his best to increase his speed. Isaac leaned against a tree as he tried to catch his breath. They had been running for an hour. Maybe 2. Isaac had lost track of time. Congratulations, boy. You were able to hold your own against a monster in the Dark Continent. Isaac squinted his eyes. What do you mean? I lost. I would have died if you hadn't saved me. Isaac knew this victory was not his. That's true. But you were able to survive against a creature faster and stronger than you because of your wits. That is more valuable than any physical attribute. The old man smiled as he said this. Even if you didn't account for the fact that your mere human bone sword was pathetic and fragile, or if the creature wouldn't be smart enough to fall for your trap. But alas, baby steps. Netero mumbled, still loud enough for Isaac to hear as the boy's face twitched in annoyance. Where exactly are we headed? Isaac asked, changing the subject. Now that he thought about it, he didn't know where exactly their destination was. Looking around, Netero responded. It should be southeast from here. Isaac looked to his compass pointing east. Remembering the true direction from his base in Ionath, he pointed in a direction. That way. Southeast. Netero looked to the direction Isaac was pointing in. Giving a thumbs up, they proceeded to walk in that direction. In the same forest, not too far away from Isaac and Netero, was an insect-like creature with a cracked exoskeleton, one arm, mangled legs and loose human teeth, dug its one claw in the ground as it pulled itself toward a large gaping hole in the forest, beside the one it had come out from. Soon reaching it, the insect sat up, digging through any debris and broken black wood that was littered in the area. Soon, a small and fragile creature came into view as the insect held the delicate and unmoving fetus in its arms. The small creature was dead. The mother insect teeth cluttered as an ominous aura exuded from it. One didn't need to communicate with the insect to know what it was feeling. It was simply protecting its child from pink and peculiar monsters it had never seen before. What did the baby insect do to deserve such a fate? Grabbing a black apple from the side and turning it over, the apple fashioned a human-like face contorted as if it had eaten something sour. Without wasting a second, the insect downed the black apple. As it did, one could see her wounds healing and arm regrowing. The insect couldn't die yet. It refused to die. Amongst all the emotions and rapid thoughts, one particularly stood out. One emotion that overpowered the rest. Vengeance. As Isaac and Netero continually walked for the past hour, Isaac started to spot gaps in vegetation, indicating the end of the forest. Pausing, Netero stared with a complicated expression. What's wrong? Isaac asked, to which he was given a quick response. Our invisible tent can only hide us so much. However, stepping out of the forest and walking in plain sight will be suicide, no matter how well we hide out in. After all, these creatures aren't blind. Upon hearing this, Isaac looked toward the gaps in the vegetation. Putting his fingers in a zero shape, over his eye and channeling small amounts of nin into it, so little that it wouldn't be noticeable unless something was actively searching for them, his sight quickly started to zoom as if he were looking through a telescope. This was a small trick Netero had taught him in between training the last week. The air was vastly clearer than the misty eye on this or cramped and compact forest. In fact, it was a clear dark wasteland that didn't seem too ominous at first glance. However, as his sight fell upon the outside of the forest with his nin ability, he unknowingly held his breath as cold sweat dripped down his back. A giant centipede, resembling a train in length, shooting out from the ground as its large pincers grabbed onto what seemed to be a pterodactyl in the sky, soon penetrating through the ground again and disappearing. A large hole that consumed an area so large it rivaled the likes of Ionath. A dark abyss that seemed to be never-ending. What seemed to be a giant sea lion with two fangs protruding from his upper jaw and one from the bottom. With red eyes, it stood unmoving. Even previous discoveries Isaac had found, such as the carnivorous volcano with tendrils, were more visible, as Isaac witnessed it swallow what looked to be a Tyrannosaurus rex. Isaac had gotten used to the horrors that were constantly presented to him in this hell, however, this didn't stop him from gulping subconsciously. However, as this was happening, a black ball of fur suddenly appeared in Isaac's view, making him jump back in surprise. Taking his hand off his eye, he searched at what had gotten him to flustered, only to be met with a small black feline creature. A small cat sat on the ground, staring at Isaac with its bright yellow eyes. Contrary to all the mutated creatures he'd seen in the Dark Continent, this cat seemed to be fairly normal, confusing Isaac as he could only stare. To what do I owe the pleasure of your untimely visit, Monet? I thought that you people did not interfere in Dark Continent matters. Netero asked with a sigh. Isaac looked at him, noticing Netero was staring at the cat. Has he finally gone crazy? Before Isaac could finish his thought, a soft and delicate voice rang in his ear. Netero, why am I not surprised to find you here? Isaac blinked, noticing the voice had come from the cat. In the blink of an eye, the cat suddenly morphed, its limbs extending and color changing. Soon, before Isaac stood a tall young female with lush blonde hair, sharp eyes, and fair skin. To put it simply, she was nothing short of beautiful. Surprised? Netero questioned. He was under the impression the female was here for him. But I should have known you were the creator of such a peskynan technique. If it weren't for the sudden outburst in Ionath and your recent use of Hatsu, I'd have never found you. Alas, it is but a poor imitation of what you've observed from your guide. The female spoke in an annoyed tone as he crossed her arms. Netero, confused, squinted his eyes. Before he could ask any questions, the female shot out her arms, pointing at me as she spoke with a tone of disgust. Boy, how did you do it? She spat, whilst staring at me. Confused, I asked while darting my eyes between the confused Netero and the female. Do what? I had barely answered before she spoke once again. No matter. For the act of illegally stepping foot into the Dark Continent, I, as an esteemed gatekeeper, shall pass your judgment. My eyes slowly opened wide as the words entered my ears. Your punishment, death. Chapter 19, Stranger 1. Death. Isaac yelled in surprise. Monet, I must urge you to rethink. Before Netero could finish, Monet snapped back at him. Don't involve yourself, Netero. Saying this, a wave of aura exploded from Monet, crashing into Netero as he stood with an expressionless demeanor. Meanwhile, Isaac's eyes opened wide as his breath became uneven. Is she crazy? She'll attract every monster in this hell hole. Isaac yelled inwardly. It seemed Netero shared his same train of thought as he spoke. Monet, think carefully about what you're doing. Leave now, Netero. If you don't, I cannot guarantee your safety. From me or whatever is on their way. She said, not taking her hands off me. Taking in a deep breath then looking at me, Netero wore a soft smile as he called out to me. Isaac, throw me an Arose. Staring at him for a few seconds, Isaac quickly rummaged in his pockets, tossing a glowing blueberry. Meanwhile, Monet took note of the boy's identical first name as Netero, as well as the blueberry the old man popped into his mouth and swallowed. Have you finally gone senile, old man? Eating an Arose raw? You must be suicidal. Monet commented as she looked at him from the corner of her eye. Ho ho, you're not fooling anybody, Monet. We both know you're older than I'll ever be. Even with your age, it seems even you don't know everything about this place. Ignoring the latter part of Netero's response, the wave of aura intensified by tenfolds as Isaac could no longer take it and wore a face of discomfort. This is the last time I'm telling you. Get out of my way. Grumbled Monet, seemingly angered by the age comment. As her aura intensified, Netero took a step forward, taking a deep breath. Because of the still silence, one could hear him exhale. As he did, all space seemed to distort for a second as an ominous aura tackled both Monet and Isaac. Monet's eyes twitched as she tried to keep her composure. Meanwhile, Isaac struggled to breathe as it took all his willpower not to drop to the ground in submission. Isaac, would you mind giving me a minute with this stranger? Netero cheerfully smiled without looking back. Isaac stood for a few seconds staring. He didn't want to leave, after all, this problem was because he'd suddenly spawned in Ionath. However, he knew he'd be nothing but a burden. Because of this, Isaac gritted his teeth, turning around and disappearing into the forest. You're a fool, Netero. What can I say, the boy has grown on me. Oh, come off your high horse. We both know you've been craving a fight with me ever since we first met. Netero looked as if he were about to say something, but paused as he nodded in agreement. Well, you aren't wrong. Clicking her teeth, Monet held both her hands in a zero shape, slowly expanding it as a thin blue layer of nan appeared from her palms, expanding at an extraordinary speed, soon enveloping the both of them and the area around them. Simultaneously, Netero took a stance as he slowly brought both palms together like he was praying. As he did, his aura took shape as it expanded rapidly, changing color and forming a figure. It wasn't long until a tall colossal golden figure, resembling a Buddha with countless arms stood behind Netero. 100 Type Guanyin Bodhisattva. Monet stared with a determined look, unmoving. First hand. One of the many hands of the golden Buddha shot vertically at a rapid speed. The air whistled and split as the air carried behind the attack was enough to knock a normal person into the ground. However, Monet seemed unfazed. With a click of her finger, a resounding boom was heard as the golden hand was knocked back, seemingly defended by the air itself. Without saying a word, Monet dug her feet into the man-eating dirt, disappearing and leaving an afterimage as she rocketed at unprecedented speeds toward Netero. Third hand. However, her path was soon obstructed by a golden hand soaring toward her. She was also quick to notice the second hand that came from behind. She knew she'd be squashed in between if she didn't move. With a clap of her hands, another but louder boom was heard as both hands were knocked back once again. As this happened, Monet's eyes widened as she snapped her head up, too late to notice the third golden hand coming from above, meters away from her. Too late to make any effective movements, Monet yelled. No. As she did, a visible wave of sound escaped from her lips, soon clashing with the golden hand as another explosion-like noise was heard, kicking up the dust. It seems we are at a stalemate. The uninjured Monet, who was finally visible once again, commented. Stalemate? I was only getting warmed up. Netero replied with a sly smile. Monet closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath. Me too. Snapping her eyes open, her once vibrant blue pupils had changed to an ominous and bright red. Seeing this, Netero's smile faded. You. Running for a few minutes, Isaac stood to take a breath. He knew he'd have to conserve his stamina for what was going to happen next. He knew he was no help to Netero in a direct confrontation against Monet, however, that didn't mean he couldn't be of help any other way. A plan formulated in his mind as he controlled his breathing, ignoring the golden giant in the distance and the constant loud explosions. Rummaging through the fair pocket space his bulky jacket offered, he pulled out a few small unbloomed flowers that could fit in his hand. He wasn't going to leave Ionath without his spoils of war. Before his time to master Invisibleness was over, he'd made sure to take as many Arose and unbloomed flowers he could. However, there was one problem Isaac was struggling with. Soon, very soon, this whole area was going to be swarming with whatever abominations hiding in the shadows. Isaac needed to work fast before it was too late. However, the lack of one crucial piece of information had eluded Isaac till now. It was the fact that most of the creatures in the Dark Continent carried a survival instinct. The instincts that separated the prey from the predator. The same instincts that every living being shared. Instincts that made one want to run from danger as the king of the jungle roamed freely. It was the same reason Isaac hadn't seen a single monster till now. Isaac looked toward his compass as he prepared to sprint back toward the ensuing battle. He thought the item to be useless as the two monsters fighting not too far away from him would attract most of the compass's attention. However, he was wrong. The compass was pointing southwest, directly opposite where Netero and Monet were fighting. As he'd seen this, a voice made him jump a little. Hello. A hoarse and calm voice came from where the compass was pointing. Jumping back, Isaac searched for the voice, quickly noticing a silhouette partially concealed by the vegetation, standing still as it stared at Isaac with a smile. Isaac was still able to see the figure's face. With an oval-shaped face and short stature, as well as heavy wrinkles, thin eyebrows, large eyes and wide mouth, what Isaac noticed was, an old man? No, Isaac didn't know if what he saw was real. Additionally, an eerie feeling circulated around Isaac's gut the more he looked at the figure. It would be more suitable Isaac didn't know what it was, but referring to it as if it were human felt wrong. Like writing with your non-dominant hand or walking backwards. As Isaac analyzed this, the smiling thing spoke once again. A mere child in the Dark Continent? You're either extremely powerful or the outside world has gone crazy. The thing let out a slight chuckle which only seemed to put Isaac more on edge. Without saying anything, Isaac stared, listening to the next words that came out of the thing's mouth. With his smile fading and his squinted eyes opening fully, the thing stared at Isaac with intent. Isaac gulped as the words rang in his ear. His heartbeat quickened and he gulped loudly. He knew he was in trouble. Tell me your name, commanded the thing. Isaac hadn't known, but he'd encountered a predator. An anomaly. The King of the Jungle. Chapter 20, Stranger 2. Tell me your name. As the thing spoke, Isaac couldn't help but think he was in a tight spot. The man commanded with a tone that oozed or else. Isaac. The old man paused, squinting his eyes as his eyebrows furrowed. Isaac? What about your second name? This time, the man asked a question rather than commanding Isaac to answer. Despite this feeling peculiar, Isaac felt less pressured, but still answered truthfully. I don't have one. He answered truthfully. Isaac, being an orphan at a young age, didn't recollect his second name. Of course, after an orphanage took him in, he was given a legal second name. However, upon leaving, he soon discarded it. The name wasn't his and always felt like something forced upon him for the convenience of others. To put it simply, he hated it. If his name wasn't his at birth, he wanted nothing to do with it. Anything else and he'd feel fake. Of course, this didn't mean he wouldn't constantly change his identity for his scams. No, that was different. No second name? Interesting. The thing stepped out of the vegetation, walking toward Isaac as they both kept their eyes on each other. Isaac, tell me your goal in life. The thing once again commanded. This time, Isaac couldn't help but feel as though there was a right and wrong answer. However, despite knowing this question was answered multiple times throughout his life. He had an answer that was so clear to him his mouth just moved before his brain could think, despite him feeling as though the question was a peculiar one. To become filthy rich. The thing showed no emotion as it glared at the boy. Meanwhile, Isaac couldn't help but think that slip of his tongue would cost him. Therefore, he tried to correct himself. But that was before. Now, I'm not so sure. Before he could finish, he was cut off. Pathetic. The thing hissed. The world is tainted with pathetic scum like yourself. There's nothing more unreliable than a man with no goal, no conviction, and no strive for anything. The thing suddenly changed its tone as it wore a face of disgust. This was the first time the thing showed any emotion outside its unnerving smile. If the thing had made the same statement to Isaac from before arriving into the Dark Continent, Isaac would have given him an earful. He remembered how passionate he was about being rich. Nothing could stop him from achieving his goal. Well, nothing but the cold touch of reality. Isaac had barely tasted the luxury of achieving his goal, before it all came crashing down onto him. Since then, he couldn't stop thinking, what a waste of time. He'd found out money wasn't sustainable and could disappear in the blink of an eye. In a situation like he was in right now, money was beyond useless. He was in no better position than he was a year ago. In fact, in pursuing his goal he was somehow in a worse position. What about you? What's your goal? What do you strive to do? Isaac thought it was time he asked a question. Me? It's simple. To kill. The thing answered nonchalantly as Isaac wore a face of defeat. Well, that isn't worrying at all. That's very interesting. I wish I could talk more, but I must be on my way. Isaac said with a smile as he slowly stepped further and further away from the man. But, he knew it wouldn't be so easy. Wait, before you leave. The thing started, raising its hand. Shake my hand. It commanded. Isaac's heartbeat quickened. There it was once again. The tone that made Isaac feel as though he had no choice. No thank you. Shake my hand. The thought of even touching something he was so on edge about made him shake his head violently. For all he knew, if he were to touch that thing, he'd shrivel up as all the life was sucked out of him. I really can't. Shake my hand. It was clear now. Isaac could either shake his hand and take the chance at possible suffering, or reject the man and definitely suffer. Walking to the man and staring at him for a few seconds, Isaac held his breath as he quickly grabbed the hand, shaking it. A second passed and nothing had changed. Was Isaac perhaps wrong? Isaac! A familiar voice yelled from behind Isaac as the boy looked back. Seeing Netero with a pale and shocked face accompanied by Monet who wore a similar look, though showing far less emotion, Isaac raised an eyebrow. However, Isaac could tell they weren't looking at him. Looking back at the thing, Isaac froze as his heartbeat quickened. The man's face was replaced with what looked to be a mask. With a pale and little to no detailed face, 3 gaping dark holes could be seen on the thing's 2 eyes and smiling mouth. What's happening? Isaac yelled without taking his eyes off the thing before him. Make a wish. Quickly. Yelled Netero, to which Isaac couldn't help but feel confused. Wish. What the hell is he talking about? However, as Netero urged him, Isaac opened his mouth and said the first thing that fell upon his mind. I wish to escape the Dark Continent. Everything went silent as no one uttered a word. After a few words, the thing let out a noise. AI. Before Isaac could question anything, in the blink of an eye, the scenery changed from the lush forest with overwhelming peculiar vegetation, to an open clearing surrounded by trees. In the middle of the clearing was a tall waterfall that crashed into the large river below. Despite building the idea that everything in the Dark Continent was dangerous, this was the first time Isaac felt as though he was back on Earth. Despite it being dark, the waterfall and river let out an ethereal glow that illuminated the surroundings, allowing Isaac to quickly spot Netero, Monet who seemed to have reverted back to a cat and the thing that seemingly brought them here. Walking toward Isaac, Netero looked the boy up and down. Are you hurt? He asked, to which Isaac shook his head. No. But isn't she going to? Isaac pointed to the black cat which squinted its eyes lazily. You're safe for now, child. I'm prohibited from meddling in the affairs which occur in the Dark Continent. Therefore, until the AI is done fulfilling your wish, I cannot touch you. Hearing this, Isaac sighed a breath of relief. Don't look too comfortable. I'll chase you to the ends of the earth in the name of justice. Upon hearing this, Isaac cursed inwardly, wanting to change the subject. AI? Isaac asked. Yes. A creature of the Dark Continent. A damned formidable one at that. As Netero spoke, the AI started to walk toward the waterfall without looking back. Isaac and Netero glanced at each other, soon nodding and following the creature as Monet silently followed from behind. I'm guessing you didn't know what you were doing when you carried out its commands. As Netero said this, Isaac's previous encounter with AI played through his mind. With a chuckle, Netero continued. You unknowingly fulfilled its commands and it rewarded you with a wish. That is the ability of the AI. Hearing this, Isaac smacked his forehead. I knew there was something off about the way it spoke. What would have happened if I didn't obey? Asked Isaac. You would have died. Shrugged Netero nonchalantly. Never mind. I made the right choice. As Isaac signed, they witnessed the AI stop below the waterfall. Without saying a word, it leapt in through a small crevice behind the waterfall, disappearing into the darkness. Where is it? Before Isaac could ask, Netero leapt through the crevice right after, leaving Monet and Isaac by themselves. As the air became awkward, Isaac quickly leapt through to escape the uncomfortable situation, soon following the black feline. Landing onto solid earth, Isaac couldn't help but savor the feeling of being away from the man eating dirt for once. Looking around the dark area which was slightly illuminated by the glow of the water, Isaac could quickly tell they were in a sort of cave behind the waterfall. Seeing the AI continue walking into the cave that looked as if it had no ending, the trio followed behind. I don't understand. The wish was to escape the Dark Continent. Where is it leading us? Isaac had countless questions running through his mind. I'm not sure. I too wasn't expecting this. Answered Netero without taking his eyes off the AI before us. Well, I expected as much. A creature that grants you any wish after obeying 3 simple commands is too good to be true. Especially in the Dark Continent. Isaac shrugged. Don't underestimate the AI, boy. Besides, the commands are proportional to how great the last wish made was. Isaac raised an eyebrow. So by that rationale, the last wish that was made was a simple one. Thus making the commands I obeyed simple as well. That's a bold statement. How do you know that? Isaac asked this, however, Netero paused. Because I was the last person to make the wish.
Thanks for listening.